Okay, let's call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order. It's Wednesday, October 11th at 7:30 p.m. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Rosado?
Here.
Atack?
Here.
Stark? Here. Chancet?
Here.
Wolf?
Here.
Salvati?
Here.
Brown?
Here.
O'Brien?
Here.
Callahan?
Here.
Meitzler?
Here.
Malay? Ewer?
Here.
Cerrone?
Here.
And McFadden?
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. One thing we don't have on the agenda, but I'll ask if there's anybody in the audience that wishes to address us tonight for an item that is not on the agenda. If you do, please come on up and address us at the podium. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 2, which is the presentation on 1 North Washington Place. Chris, you going to start us out with that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I was thinking, in the time I've been doing this, I don't think I've ever read something into the record as often as I have on this project, and this will be the third time. So I don't know what it tells you, except that I'm afraid extemporaneous speaking on my behalf may miss a point or otherwise not be concise enough and comprehensive. So I do want to make a statement to the Committee of the Whole, and then after that I'll turn it over to Dave. But again, tonight's special Committee of the Whole meeting is being held solely for the purpose of discussing the developer's request to revise the approved plan for 1 Washington Place. Dave Petzelt is here to present these plan revisions on behalf of the developer, Shodine. I'll introduce Dave in a moment, but before I do, I've been asked to summarize the requested revisions to the plans and the developer's request to the city to increase the bond sale in support of the project from $14 million as originally approved in the TIF redevelopment agreement to $16 million. Friday, we placed on the city's webpage of this meeting's agenda, including the memo to the cow from Laura Newman. The same memo, with its attachments, was posted to the city's cow file folder this morning. The memo generally discusses the changes proposed to the 1 Washington Place building composition, namely 1, reducing the project's total commercial space from approximately 14,600 square feet to 5,725 square feet by eliminating all of the nearly 8,900 square feet of commercial space planned for East Wilson Street. Number 2, reducing the total parking space count in the garage from approximately 350 spaces to 335 spaces. And 3, creating 8 additional residential units within the aforesaid eliminated commercial space and parking areas. The memo includes an attached list of pros and cons concerning the proposed plan revisions. I won't take time here to discuss each item on the list, but certainly the city staff and I, and most likely developer, are prepared to answer any questions concerning or otherwise further elaborate on any of the pros or cons on that list. I'm in favor of the recommended changes to the plan, and not because I am an unflinching and single-minded supporter of the developer or even of the development itself. No developer is beyond reproach, and no development, especially a negotiated one, is without some less than optimal aspects. I support the revised plan because, although it's not everything that was originally envisioned when the city approved the original plan, it remains very close to it in many respects, and in my opinion, if built, will still have a tremendous positive impact on the city's downtown central business district. The commercial component of the project has always been a significant factor in the consideration and the ultimate approval of the project. Certainly losing more than 60% of what was originally proposed, and considering this loss occurs directly along East Wilson Street commercial corridor, is of no small consequence. However, I would argue that the real meat and the potatoes of this project has always been the construction of the 2-tiered public parking garage and nearly 200 new downtown apartments located in a building no less than 300 feet from the Fox River itself. Even with the loss of the commercial space along East Wilson Street, the project still includes more than 5,700 square feet of commercial space along the city's attractive and commercially viable North River Street. The proposed change from commercial to residential use on East Wilson Street reduces the mixed character of the building itself. However, in considering the existing and potential future character of the surrounding neighborhood, and in light of the fact that the revised plan would reduce some of the vertical mixed-use pattern of the 1 Washington Place building itself, the city can still insist on a horizontal mixture of uses along the street and across the various East Wilson Street properties. Obviously, downtown Batavia does not much match local neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, But if you are familiar with the Loyola University neighborhood along North Sheridan Road and between Devon and Pratt, you can readily see how such a street-level, horizontal mixture of uses has proven to create a very successful and economically viable community. In speaking of the residential component only, recent land use and economic development research is replete with examples of how critical new residential growth and public parking is to the expansion and sustained viability of suburban and exurban downtowns. Further, one needs only to visit Elmhurst, Naperville, Wheaton, Elgin, Geneva, and soon to be coming to St. Charles to experience real-life examples of how downtown residential growth and availability of public parking have combined to stimulate growth in the central business districts throughout western Chicagoland. Certainly, the large change in the building use composition is not the only issue you must consider in weighing the pros and cons of the proposed revisions to the plan. As mentioned, the developer is requesting that the city increase its upfront financial assistance in support of the project from a $14 million to a $16 million bond issue. Yet in the end, this increase does not really increase the city's actual ultimate out-of-pocket cost and risk. Actually, the increase in debt translates as an increase in the developer and/or owner annual payments to the city to service this debt. This is true whether the payments are made from paying the incremental tax revenue or taxes on the property, paying special service taxes, direct cash payments, or any combination of the three. And this condition is stipulated in the proposed allied amendment to the redevelopment agreement. And just a reminder, this is probably more for the public than for the city council, as this is a TIF redevelopment project, the One Washington Place development represents the true development pays its own way. Because as in the end, it's the actual project itself and the developer, owner or any successor owner, that is responsible to pay for the development cost, both the initial construction as well as any debt that need to be paid off through the city's assistance in the construction. In my opinion, and not acting on behalf of the developer, nor solely on behalf of the project itself, but instead I believe on behalf of the city and its downtown's immediate and long-term future economic vitality and sustained growth, if the developer is not willing or is not able to construct the One Washington Place project as it was originally proposed, but is willing instead to construct a slightly modified development proposal, then the cow must ask itself if losing approximately 8,900 square feet of commercial space and 16 parking spaces, while still retaining 5,725 square feet of new commercial space and 335 public parking spaces, as well as adding 8 more additional residential units to the downtown, is worth turning away this opportunity to substantially grow the downtown and the city of Batavia generally. Finally, I would ask you to consider that even if another development proposal was to come before the city anytime soon, and assuming it will have similar land use benefits to the community, its consideration and approval, let alone its construction and occupancy, could be years away. And if such an alternative project were to be proposed as a TIF-assisted redevelopment, which I suspect it would be, the statutory 23-year TIF period that began this past January carries an expiration date that is fixed and will serve as a defining parameter in any future TIF deal. Again, before introducing Dave, I appreciate the opportunity to introduce the project and this matter generally to the cow, and the time you afforded me to do so, and your consideration of my advocacy in support of the revised plans. Thank you. David.
Chris, before we go with Dave here, I do have a question for you, and then maybe we could open it up to the committee if they have any questions for you before Dave does his presentation. If there's any alterations that are made to the building as has been proposed,
Yes, sir.
physical alterations, does this project have to go back through the entire process? Public hearings, plan commission, historic preservation?
I believe that's very likely, particularly if there's substantial changes to the physical appearance. If changes to the composition of the building, I'm all but certain, but I guess I'd defer to Scott Buenig on that.
Yeah, it depends on the gravity and the size and the magnitude of what's being proposed for changes. If it's a change in the amount of apartments and square footage of commercial, then absolutely it would have to go to Plan Commission. If it's just a material change on the exterior, again, it depends on, the magnitude of it. It might be just a design review change, but again, we would have to look and see exactly what the change would be to determine that.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Chris before we turn it over to Dave? Dan?
Curious how you view this. I'm super not happy about the retail leaving East Wilson. But I'm curious.
Dan,
if you
pull the mic up towards you.
I'm curious if you believe that this creates some sort of artificial demand for commercial and adjacent properties, and whether this could actually be a good thing.
My personal opinion is you've got tremendous opportunity to cross the street still. You've got a parking asset that actually could be converted in a two-tiered scenario with parking underneath and private project above, right at the stop parking lot.
Right.
You've then got some fairly underutilized and perhaps even less than desirable or appropriate uses for a commercial district all the way to Washington Street. I believe that area will become ripe for development big time if this project is built. Not only because people, with respect to changing the development scenario as it's been previously proposed, now you've got residential project and you've got some apartments. They'll walk out their front door, they're going to see commercial right there. That guy in that commercial space is going to have a sign out there. It'll be very visible to those new apartments. But more importantly, without those apartments, and of grander importance, without the other 190 or whatever it's left, that area across the street will most likely stay in a status quo. I believe that this project, even though it may not have commercial directly across the street, now that we're proposing residential, the developer is proposing residential, the project itself will still stimulate commercial across the street that may not otherwise happen. If you don't build the project, I don't believe anytime soon that area across the street will be stimulated for development. And again, my example with North Sheridan is, I believe that just because you're going to have a stretch of streetscape that will not be commercial doesn't necessarily mean you're going to never have commercial either further east of this property, for instance, or more probably readily across the street from it, because that does not necessarily negate the commercial vitality and viability of the space across the street. What does negate it is the existing status quo, which is no stimulated foot traffic, no customers, just kind of a dead end. So, again, if it was all commercial on both sides of the street, that's probably the home run, to use the vernacular of this afternoon. But, without it, you don't have anything. But you certainly got, a ball in play, I guess. I mean, this is an important project, even without the commercial on Wilson Street, in my opinion. And I believe the commercial proposed areas across the street will benefit from the project, notwithstanding the fact that there'll be residential on Wilson Street.
And then from a practical standpoint, are these units going to be worth less or worth more because they're technically on the street?
I think that could be argued both ways. I know some people are going to say, who wants to live on the street where you've got cars going past, you've got people plowing streets? I don't know. I see a lot of vitality on the street in those same scenarios. I mean, why would people be wanting to, you would say, who would want to sit outside at a table right along a main drag? But, if you know the office space, for instance, in St. Charles, the owner bought the property actually from the city immediately east of that. It was a vacant property solely to build an outdoor seating area. Now he has a tent up there an awful lot, but because that creates activity on the street, people want to be on the street. They either want to be seen or they want to just see the vitality of people walking around. I personally believe you'd be surprised how many people would be willing to walk right out on the street, especially when you contrast it with always having to walk outside into a hallway. Instead you might have a little front yard or at least a seating area.
I get it because it's commercial. I don't get it if I'm wearing a robe going out to get my newspaper. It just feels like a completely different thing.
And your neighbors may feel similarly. But no, I see your point, and I don't mean to make light of it. I think one could argue, and let's let the developer speak to that because he's the one who's got to rent them. Will those be lesser desirable and therefore lower rent product than what's upstairs? Very possibly. But they are proposing them, so I don't think they think they'll be vacant, but they may be of lesser value. I do, again, see some positive of having a little outside area in which to sit, maybe have flower pots. I don't know, I'm kind of thinking out loud.
One last question. I appreciate your prepared statement. You're really okay with this?
I don't think it's what we originally envisioned, and I'm not going to discount that. I do think that, I believe the developer when he says that the project can't be built economically viably.
I understand the
as
math.
he's got it, and so I'm okay with it.
Okay.
I think it's 90% of what we really wanted, and sometimes that's what you got to take in order to stimulate what you'll get thereafter, which is a bustling downtown and a dramatic change to, the existing storefronts, let alone spaces that can be redeveloped and made more value.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Nick?
Yeah, you kind of inferred that, hey, we already executed the TIF, the clock is ticking. I've seen other TIFs extended. Is there anything that would preclude us from extending this? Or is there any reason another developer wouldn't look at a 19-year TIF and see some huge benefit in that?
It's only the fact that it is what it is with respect to the time of the, that's left to pay back. Say you did a 20-year bond. You assume the first couple, 3 years, you won't get any increment, you capitalize the interest, but then you've got 20 years left to pay off the bond. That really does make a difference. Now, to answer your first question, we don't have the authority locally to extend the TIF, but the state does. And we could, of course, appeal to the state to get an extension, which happened twice already on other TIF districts. And if that sounded threatening, I didn't mean it to be. I think it's only fair to mention, and I think our finance director, Ms. Colby, can elaborate. It really is important, if we're going to be doing a TIF measure with respect to financing the project, that we have enough time till the TIF expires to make sure we get all the increment we need to pay back the debt. That's not just the true position of the financial nature, but even to sell the bonds, make them attractive, we need to know that we can pay them back. And the shorter the TIF period is, the more the increment has to be to do that, or the bulk payments in difference. So it's
Well,
something to
along those
consider.
lines, just for future reference and future projects, is there a reason we went all in and committed to this TIF already, yet we're in this position? Where the developer has the chance to say, you know what, it doesn't look good now.
Well, I think we first of all, we're with the developer in the estimates of the project cost. And we, from the very beginning, started working on the increment versus the debt. And we knew what the cost was going to be of what we were willing to support at $14 million. And then assumed over time, it'd be 20 million plus, perhaps, in total payouts, with the interest over time. And we did the incremental adjustments year to year and found that we'll have enough to pay this off. In the beginning, it probably won't, but that's why we anteed up with the SSA. So going into it, our fundamental calculations were, I think, strong. But where it really fell apart was the cost went up. And the cost, in large measure, were due to the parking. And the parking is the city's public asset. In fact, the parking is the bulk of what are eligible costs under TIF. That's what we thought the project was so important, was that, again, that was not just trying to find a reason to be supportive. I really do believe the meat and potatoes of this project is the residential and the public parking asset. When you think about it, 8,900 square feet of commercial, although I'm not going to diminish the fact that it's in a prime location on our East Wilson Street corridor, but it's really kind of just a small strip center. That's not a big deal area-wide, in a downtown development, all told. So I don't believe the land use component, maybe the geography is a little different, but the composition of the building with respect to how much commercial versus the rest of the building, losing that commercial is not that big of a deal. In fact, your actual parking demand will be reduced by exchanging that commercial with residential. That will help in the parking, but that's off the subject. Your question about how do we get ourselves into this, we believed in the estimates, we believed in what it would cost, how much we need to put in at 14 million. That's what was in the agreement. We thought we could pay that back based on the increment. We now believe we can pay this back based on even at 16 million. We have information from the developer whose third-party analyst found that the rent rates will be higher. And in either case, if they don't meet anything near what they think, we'll still have the obligation of the developer to pay the differential, the delta between the increment and what's actually due. I don't think, to be honest with you, Alderman, I don't think the staff is very much worried that we've got a financial problem. What we're at least personally, what I'm worried about is we have no project. And we'd have to start from scratch. And in the meantime, let's not forget, and your point, although it didn't specifically mention it, we're already all in on a lot of this project. I mean, our costs associated with land acquisition and demolition, all of this was envisioned to make the project work. And, you know, I'm not trying to put any gun to anybody's head.
Well,
I
that's
saw the
my
look at your
business.
face.
That's
Yeah.
my business in trading. And if there's a bad trade on, that doesn't mean you hold on to it to hope that it comes out. You get out and you look for the next.
But
trade.
my serious position is on this, I don't believe this is a bad trade. I believe this is 90% of what we wanted. It's not everything we hoped for, but things changed. In order for the developer to build the project or willingness to build it, he has to make a change in the project. He recognizes that he's also all in. If he's told not no, but heck no, we're not doing this, he puts his big boy pants on just like we do, and we say, hopefully there's something else out there. I mean, though I'm paraphrasing, but I'm sure he'll reiterate that same point.
I'd like to just say, please let him speak for himself. Don't speak for him.
That's fair.
And then the other thing, I disagree with you, Chris, when you say we have no project. Because as far as I'm concerned, we do have a project. We've got an RDA, we've got a set of drawings, or we've got a conceptual set of drawings, we've got everything that's gone through Plan Commission, public hearings, CDC, COW, City Council, everything else. Everything's been approved. So we do have a project. But now we're faced with the possibility of this project fading away. So that's what we're faced with here tonight. I believe we have a project, but for some reason, it may be fading away. Does anybody else have any questions for Chris, or should we turn it over to Dave?
Oh, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Good evening. For the record, my name is David Patzelt, P-A-T-Z-E-L-T, 77 North First Street, Geneva, Illinois, 60134. I have some paper copies of the presentation this evening, and I'm going to circulate those so that each of you have a copy. Take one, Cass, sure. There is some confidential information within this document, so I would ask that they not be distributed outside the council.
You want to keep one?
A couple more might be for. And before I get started, I thought I'd jump in on a couple of the questions that were asked. Chairman Brown, you had asked about the revision to the plan. Would it require going back to the Plan Commission and Historic Preservation? Our quick opinion on that, and we are seeking a legal opinion, but yes, we believe it would be classified as an adjustment. That is the technical term, and that technical term is it a minor adjustment or a major change to the adjustment. Regardless of what that, of whether it's a minor or major, we fully anticipate that as our partner in this, we see that the City of Batavia is our partner, that we would be back before the HPC as well as the Plan Commission with whatever changes there are to the plan, whatever is required. To start with, there was, maybe I need to fess up, yes, we went out for bid, the project came in much higher than anticipated in our costs. The first question that we have to ask ourselves is what the heck happened? The first page that is up on the screen now, and you have it in your attachment, is a copy of the assumptions that we had prepared back some time ago and had given to city staff confidentially and city staff had passed that on to their financial consultants, Kane McKenna. Two items jump off of that page. The first one you'll see under the residential parking underground and the public parking deck per parking space. It's identified that we were using a number of $23,900 for cost of construction of that parking deck. The numbers actually came in at about $36,000, $37,000 per space, which we found very hard to believe. Went back to the contractors and architect. We're trying to work on what exactly happened, talked with staff about it. And I think the final answer to me came that when staff and myself, our architect, we were sitting in front of the city's consultant, Walker Parking, Carl Walker, their parking consultants. The person there actually said, well, what's wrong with your number? That bid of $35,000, $36,000 is actually what it would cost. And I think everybody sat around the table looking at each other, and yes, I sat dumbfounded. That is my number. I put that number in there. As Chris alluded, I've got big pants. I've got to wear the big pants, and I understand that's an error, that's a bust. And we have been fully committed to this project. We have been all in. We have spent close to almost $400,000 on engineering drawings and preparation for this project. But at the same time, we are prepared to, as you said, don't make another bad trade or hang on to it and hope that it comes back. We are too prepared to walk on this project and swallow our lumps with a loss of the $300,000 to $400,000. That being said, we are also very interested in trying to work through the problem or through this opportunity with our partner, the city of Batavia. There was one other error in this document, and that is the one in the blue box. That error did not come upon us until we were out seeking financing, and our lender required a third-party market analysis of our assumptions. That third-party analyst came back and showed that their anticipated rents on the residential component were going to be significantly higher than the rents that are in that blue box. That study has been provided to the staff. Again, is a confidential document. We ask that document not be shared, but I assume that document will find its way into the councilman's hands if they so elect to have it. So what does that do? That shows that our revenues originally anticipated were lower than what the third-party analyst believes. So maybe that's a good problem, in that we anticipate that the revenues are going to go up. But when we looked at the cost, besides just the parking space or parking spaces, we didn't find all of the overruns or where our costs were excessive. So we started looking at the plan a little bit harder and trying to understand where some of our cost issues are. And one area of the plan really jumped off at us, and that was this lower section, generally along Wilson Street. And for the audience in the red writing, I've kind of highlighted those areas. The first item was the ratio of parking spaces and square footage relative to that to a parking space. And what we are concluding there is that we're finding that we are too many square feet for each parking space, so we needed to find out why we had so high a square footage for each parking space. The next one was why was this area of the building so complicated, and I want to walk you through the complications associated with this area of the building, and with it being so complicated, what costs was it forcing the project to endure to get this portion of the project built. That large component of that, what you're going to hear about tonight, is really understanding the retail space and the parking underneath the retail space, and the need for retail space to have level floors, tall ceilings, and in order to accommodate that, lowering of the parking garage when we wanted to park underneath that retail space. So that's kind of a quick summary of it, but I'd like to walk you through some of those changes. The first one is if you look at the site plan and you look at State Street relative to Wilson Street, the two streets aren't parallel. So during our architectural planning, good planners like to keep Wilson Street, all of the retail, generally in line, what I'm going to call it, generally in line with the center line of the road or the back of the curb, so that you have that uniformity of the retail. Similarly, we're doing the same thing on State Street. But what that does is that actually creates our prongs. If you're call the three fingers of the building prongs, those prongs aren't parallel to each other. So they're spread apart and they're bent ever so slightly, but over a course of 100 plus feet, you'll see the additional square footage. That comes up on this slide. So what this is actually taken inside our parking garage. The green line that you see on the slide is actually the outline of the southern prong of the residential tower above the podium. Podium being the concrete slab. The yellow shaded area actually reflects what I'm going to call as a parking drive aisle. Typically, when you're in a parking lot, the drive aisle is very rectangular, I'll say. It's a uniform dimension in width. But because of our building prongs being bent or bent outward, the drive aisle is actually wider at one end than it is at the other end. The narrowest end is the minimum width that we use in planning for drive aisles. So what this did was that additional square footage at the wider end of the prong, or the wider end of that drive aisle, was adding square footage unnecessarily, adding cost of construction, and not getting any benefit of it. We're not parking any additional cars in that area. It's literally just drive aisle space. So we needed to get rid of, or try to get rid of, or reduce that additional square footage. So what we did, or in this new plan, is that, okay, we need to rotate that prong back parallel so that the prongs are all parallel with each other. And when we do that, we believe that we know that we are going to be reducing the square footage of that space, and we have calculated that, and that number will come up later in the presentation here. What does that do to the outside of the building when you rotate that prong? If you look at the drawing in the lower left, you'll see that the dotted line, which represents the right-of-way line, we are no longer parallel to the right-of-way line. We've now picked up that area that was inside the building is now outside the building. Disadvantage for retail is that now our retail is pushed away from the sidewalk. Street shoppers, typically, when you walk down the street, you want that window to be up close to the sidewalk. When that window is set far in, you're less likely to do window shopping. And then the ultimate question is, what do you do with that space between the window and the edge, or the edge of the sidewalk? So I'll talk more about that in a couple future slides coming up here. The next slide is an illustration of that same lower level parking deck where we're parking underneath the residential area. So you'll see that the numbers on the screen represent a vertical elevation. So that's 688 is 688 feet above sea level, but in essence gives you an idea of an elevation grade. The main part of the parking lot is 688. The retail is where that 684 is at. And in order to get parking underneath the retail, again, the ceiling of the retail is the floor of the residential. That has to remain level. We want taller ceilings in retail than we want residential, so we have to actually push the floor down of the retail. When we push the floor down of the retail, we have a minimum requirement for height distance on a parking lot. We have to push the floor of the parking lot down. So now we are ramping down already below grade. We're even getting deeper into grade and taller foundation walls, and also hitting bedrock at the what is the southwest corner, or at that 684. So we knew, bidders knew, that they were going to have to do rock excavation to drop this floor. Ideally, we'd like all the floors level. We don't want to have to drop these floors. So again, solutions coming up, but you can see that this dropping of the floors creates expense. Now, we know that Wilson Street from Washington to the alley or the walkway, that there's a significant grade change, sloping downhill towards the river. We also know that we want the floors to be as tall as possible, so we were stepping the retail floors down, trying to keep up with that grade going downhill down Wilson Street. This slide, each of the colors that you see on that floor plan represent a different vertical elevation of the retail space. So all three of those colors together is the 8,800 square feet-ish that we've been talking about eliminating. That retail space, the floors, are at three different elevations. To go from retail space yellow to retail space pink to go to retail space green, on the inside of the building, you'd have to actually ramp internally for ADA access from retail space 1 to 2 to 3. Dropping the floor, again, adds significant cost, but also we question how viable is this retail space with the dropping of the grade as you traverse along the building. Now, you know, the ceilings, as I indicated earlier, the ceilings of that are all at the same elevation, same height, because on top of that ceiling is residential. Those floors are all level. So what's happening is the actual floor to ceiling height within that retail space is changing from a ceiling height of 12 feet in the green to 14 feet in the yellow. So it's 12 to 13 to 14 feet in ceiling height. 12 feet is not an ideal ceiling height for commercial needs these days. It's the best that we could do when we were working with this plan. The other thing, when you look at this, you'll look at that green space, and as Chris described, if it was an 8,800 or a 9,000 square foot retail strip center, that would be all flat, straight across, nice box. Any user comes in and you could slice it up however you'd like. That green space to us starts to look like, boy, that's a difficult space to lease. An L-shaped, skinny finger like that will be difficult to lease. Then you also look at the first entry door into the yellow space, and that I've indicated there with that blue line and a dimension there. From the corner of the building to that yellow space, the door to get into that space is 75 feet. That means two things. One, if you're typically you want to enter in the center of your space, you're not going to be able to. You're going to be entering at the high side of that space. Plus, it's 74 feet. Plus, once you enter that retail space, you have to walk 74 feet to the left to use that entire space. The other issue is that since the grade continues to fall to the west, the floor of the yellow space is actually 6 feet above the alley or the walkway outside the Grabiscus building. So if you were window shopping, you'd have to look up 6 feet to see the windowsill of the floor of that retail space. Again, it made us question, is this really viable commercial space as much as we want to try to get this area to work for commercial space? The next area that we looked at was the exiting out of the garage for the public access. Again, trying to illustrate the amount of grade change between the spaces. Each color that you see on the slide there represents a different floor elevation or vertical elevation. So there's a multitude of different grades to get in and out of the garage, making it very cumbersome, as well as dropping floors to get in and out. Such a problem that the elevator, typically in an elevator, the door you go in is typically the door you go out. If an elevator has to stop what we call mid-floor or at a half a floor, you have to put the door on the opposite side of the elevator, so you end up with a dual-doored elevator. That becomes a very expensive elevator. Due to the grade changes here, we needed a dual-door elevator. Again, something for us to look at and ask, how can we eliminate that cost? So what we did do with the elevator and that stairway is we thought, let's use the Wilson Street grade, the sloping of it, to get us to a grade where we can walk directly into the parking garage. And that took that elevator and the stairway and slid it almost to the bell tower. That's the area shaded in yellow. We also knew that the dumpster enclosure, which is the dumpster enclosure provided for the retailers and restaurants along River Lane, that we could not move that. We didn't want people walking their garbage all the way up Wilson Street. So we also shaded there in yellow. We kept those dumpsters located in there, and that's just part of the project. That life is what it is. You can't find a better location for it. So now you see at the southeast corner is the entry to the garage, as well as a single-door elevator. Then the next question was, when you push back this area and you have a garage facing the Wilson Street, how can you skin or make the elevation look improved or enhanced? There's many projects going on throughout the country. It's called a Texas Wrap. Texas Wrap, for those of you that travel I-88, get down near 355. I'm going to say generally at the southwest corner of I-88 and 355. There's an apartment project that was done by Opus. It's called the Avant. Was at one point called the Arboretum. Believe it or not, that project is a Texas Wrap. What exactly is a Texas Wrap? Texas Wrap is they take a parking structure and they wrap it with residential to give you the idea that there's no parking garage there. That's the attempt here that we were trying to do, was can we wrap any portion of our building with residential to improve the architecture of the parking garage. So in lieu of retail, we put residential along this front facade of Wilson Street. What would those elevations look like? We prepared some sketches of what it potentially could look like. The first one on this slide that I'm giving you, and I'm just highlighting the area of the approved plan that has changed. So that area shaded in yellow, as you see on the screen, that is the elevation of the approved plan in front of you. That area in yellow is the area that's going to change. I'm going to go to the next slide, which shows the residential component now changed. Again, nothing above that yellow line or that yellow shaded area really changed, other than the residential component. I'll toggle back and forth so you can try to get, this is the retail, what is currently approved, and that is the residential area that we're suggesting, or that area. Again, the retail, the residential. Now, I understand this is a black and white sketch, hard line computer drawing, but what other areas, or are there other areas that have this residential type component on a commercial street? What could it look like? So here is an example, typical urban area, where in the far left photo, or the far left side of the photo, you see a commercial building. What's interesting about this is you see that large P is actually an entrance to a parking deck with a residential component immediately to the right, and then another residential home with a limestone arch. I'm not a fan of the architecture, but I'm just trying to show that in urban areas, having a commercial use immediately adjacent to stairways that come directly down and or immediate access, that we see that across urban areas all across the country. Again, giving you another example. Yes, older buildings, older architecture. Left side here, you see a commercial use. Right side here, you see a walk-up apartment or condominium use. Again, just another example. This one's a little bit rougher with all the foliage on the trees, but what I liked about this is that the courtyard that we're showing along Wilson Avenue, to soften that between traffic and residential, it can be landscaped and enhanced and actually be an outdoor private space inside that fenced area for the residential inhabitants of the building. How would it look across the street if the gas station across the street from us developed? Well, here's an example of that. Again, not a fan of the fence or the red door on the building, but again, it gives you an idea of residential on the right-hand side and commercial use on the left-hand side of the street. Again, again, on a relatively busy street. Using that same idea and trying to find a way to further increase our revenues, we know that from the study, plus even in our own analysis, we knew that residential rental rates are higher than the commercial rental rates. Commercial construction is typically more expensive than the residential construction. So residential is producing better revenues than commercial. Can we add some additional residential units? Also, how do we improve that elevation of the building on State Street, which I'm going to show you, admittedly, was probably our worst elevation of the building. It was very bland, with 2 levels of the parking deck being exposed on that north elevation. So this plan here in the yellowed area highlights the area of where the residential components were being added along that north wall. This, again, taking the north elevation of the building, I've highlighted the area that is only the area that's going to change. This is the approved plan. So this is your, again, the approved plan with the parking deck. Those sets of square windows, the 2 rows from the bottom up, are all windows that are in the parking deck. They're not in residential units. And the next plan, what we're proposing, those are residential units. And you don't have the garage and that the garage windows or the garage tall facade. So again, I'll toggle back and forth. This is currently approved with all garage. This is with residential component added. Again, it's a black line drawing. We'd want to continue to work with these plans to further enhance the elevation, but we believe that it would truly improve that elevation along the north face of the building. So what do these changes amount to? The first thing we did was we looked at the square footage of the commercial space, and as you've heard, the square footage of the commercial space has changed from, I'm going to call it 14,006 to roughly 5,700, and there's the loss of the 8,800 square feet, which staff has provided for you in the report. Residential units have gone from 186 to 194. When you look at those plans, you may see that on the north elevation that there's 2 stories of residential. Those are actually 2-story residential. We think that it's a different type of unit. We call them a direct access off of the street. The bedrooms are above the first floor living area. So if you're going to check our numbers or double count our spaces, please make sure that you don't include both levels as independent units like you do on the typical residential floor. It's a 2-story stacked unit. So the total is a total of 8 units have been added. In between, when I met with staff, and I understand that staff provided some of this information to the council, that number was actually at 9. We later went back, and that unit that is at the southwest corner of the building, closest to what I'll call the Graviscus building, was a 1-bedroom plus a studio. Based on the doorway and staff's comment that we really didn't like the idea that 2 different apartment users use the same stairway to get into their apartment, we changed that floor plan from a studio and a 1-bedroom into a 2-bedroom unit. So that's, you didn't lose any square footage of residential space or the residential rental, but we did lose, technically, we dropped a unit. So I just want to highlight that. You may have read reports or information that was 9. It is now 8. The parking garage square footage, closing our prong up, you can see that we lost or reduced square footage in the parking garage. Our parking spaces, yes, parking spaces did go down. They went down by 16. As Chris alluded to or indicated, keep in mind that if you reduce the commercial square footage, if you're using a ratio of 3 parking spaces per 1,000, there's a reduction there of 27 spaces. If you're going to use 4 per 1,000, there's 36 spaces. And if you're going to count it as a restaurant and used it at 10 per 1,000, there would technically be a reduction of 88 spaces. So there is again, it's like a teeter-totter. This whole project is a teeter-totter. put something on one side, something else happens, you take something off, and something else changes. The estimated market value. You were provided a little bit more detailed backup, I believe, in the last study for confidential reasons and trying to keep some of that report as confidential as we can. I'm providing just a quick summary here, but in essence, the set of columns on the left hand is the currently approved plan. Set of columns on the right is the proposed revised plan. And you'll see that we've applied the market value per square foot for each of the various spaces. And in essence, the value has increased by $435,000, or call it $500,000. What does that mean? That $500,000 just in the change of the square footage improves the TIF increment or tax dollars being generated by this project. Lastly, as I've mentioned, the third-party independent market study did show a improved residential rental rate, which when that number goes back through the calculation, that added revenue justifies the additional $2 million in the TIF increment. That being said, as Chris has indicated, we as the developer are solely responsible for paying that debt, regardless if the rental rate comes in or doesn't come in. That is, it will be paid on the tax bill, or it will be paid through the backup SSA, or thirdly, the redevelopment agreement allows for a voluntary City of Batavia notifying us, and within 30 days we send a check. But irregardless, we are responsible for paying that debt, whether that rent comes in or not. So, kind of wrap it up in one slide, the summary. We need to keep the parking levels at the same level. We learned a lesson that you can't be dropping the parking levels to get underneath the retail. It just adds a lot of cost. We have to make sure that we get efficient drive aisles and keep that ratio down between square footage and parking and per parking spot. We wanted to get rid of digging out that bedrock in that southwest corner, which the bedrock is very expensive. Relocated the parking or the parking exit or the garage exit and entrance for the pedestrians along Wilson Street, where we're taking advantage of the grade. We eliminated the double-doored elevator and the ramping associated around that double-doored elevator. Removed the commercial along Wilson, but we've added the residential that we believe adds additional funding through to the TIF increment. Some of what is our request, I guess, of tonight after a discussion? My request would be that you authorize staff to proceed with evaluating our submittals. I understand they're on hold pending your direction. I would ask that you give them direction to proceed with preparing a revision to the RDA. All that, again, being said, I fully understand that if you say, no, we like the original project, we only want the original project, I understand that our partnership, at least on this project, is no longer. And that's something that I have to accept and willing to accept. Hope being that we then can get those reviewed and the RDA updated, and we can return to council with the findings on those studies, provide you with the red line marked up document, and we're off, hopefully, back to the races. And as Chairman Brown asked, that yes, going back, doing some more architecture, cleaning up getting good quality elevations, and bringing that back through the zoning and entitlement process. So that concludes my presentation. I know that staff had prepared. I read their staff report today. There was some pros and cons identified in the back of the report, and I understand that in every good analysis, you want to have pros and cons, and whether you like being on the pro side or you like being on the con side. I have always been the person that the glass is always half full, so I have a tough time swallowing the cons. There were a couple cons listed in that report that I disagree with. As an example, loss of commercial property tax space, and it was identified on, I think it was page 1 of the C1 attachment. Albeit that is true, we disagree with that. I think you have to continue that statement, or that when you take the commercial away, what are you putting in its place? And I believe the presentation that I showed here, that yes, we're adding residential back, and the net effect to that change is actually positive, to the tune of about $400,000 or $500,000 in value, market value, on an annual basis for TIF increments. So there are some others that I somewhat disagree with, but I'll let those stand as comments made by staff. And with that, I'm available for questions, comments, further discussion, wherever it takes us.
Okay, Scott?
Just one, based on that last comment that you don't necessarily agree with. Chris, in that amount of, that may be true, that we make up for it in retail on a real estate tax basis, which we won't see for 23 years anyways, but what is a typical amount of money that you can plan on from a retail space in sales tax revenue?
It kind of varies depending on the
Just
location.
putting
obviously.
Insurance companies
Yeah.
and
Like in a shopping mall, for instance, like you'll look close to $300 a square foot annually. Obviously a jewelry store does a whole lot more than that. You don't need that much space to put your product out there. Dollar store. So it just depends on the product and the location. But then again, when you look at a shopping center or a mall, $275 to $325 a square foot in annual sales. So that would translate to our sales tax. So I guess what you're getting at, there's going to be a slight increase residential by square foot versus commercial, but there's the loss, and I think that's indicated in the cons of the retail sales tax that would be created at that space.
but I guess it's too, who knows what's going in, but it's too hard to predict what that loss would be, so we leave it off.
No, well, I think we don't leave it off necessarily, but I would put a caveat that I tend to agree to some extent that is less than quality grade A retail space there, only because you've got a scenario where the sidewalk is doing this, and on the west end of the building, you'd have to climb up to the space, similar to the dance studio, and on the east end of the building, you'd have to go down to the space. So that, my thinking is, unless it was a real hot retail area, retail begets more retail because of the mass shopping experience. It isn't now. I don't see it being right away. Perhaps across the street, if that grows, it might be. But I think that's probably more going to be in a commercial value, office space, services, salons. I just think that's going to be a tough retail space to rent. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's certainly not ideal based on the grade change and the lack of retail surrounding it.
So there would have been no chance for like a grocer to be in there or anything?
A grocer would be definitely difficult. I mean, to get your carts up and down. I think a grocer is tough in that space. Maybe a boutique type like deli or meat shop, a bakery won't be so difficult, but it's only 800 square feet, so it would not lend itself to a big grocer anyways. But it's possible. Destination grocer could work there. Someone suggested a restaurant similar to what's a Chianti, now it's called Livia or something, that has this under. But the problem with that is that a restaurant underneath apartments and residential often could be, there could be a problem with noise and with HVAC and that kind of thing. So it's not an ideal restaurant space either, although it would be kind of a cool restaurant space if it were not below residential. But that was a thought we had. So I do believe there's something to be said for, it's not a real primo retail space, but if it were commercial, it probably would be more likely filled with services and office uses.
Scott?
We actually have a 1% municipal tax and a 1% home rule tax. So it's a 2%. 2%, and if there was alcohol sales, there's additional sales tax.
Scott?
So Alderman, to do the math, if you're $250 per square foot annual gross sales and your take is 2% on the sales tax, that's do 2% of the 250 to 2% of $300 per square foot times whatever square footage was you were looking for. So that would translate out. But you're correct that if that became a law office or an insurance office, it's a zero. Chris had mentioned the Kianis, and we, in our portfolio, we have about 1 million square feet of commercial use. We do commercial development. We want commercial use. We're not afraid to own and manage commercial use. We own the building that the Kianis on 3rd Street is in. We couldn't get a restaurant in there 30-some years ago. Kent Chodine put his own restaurant in called Kiani's. The not wanting to be in the restaurant business, we eventually had the manager of the Kiani's take that over. Because that space is somewhat subterranean, it's a challenge for a restaurant. Kiani's ended up moving out of that space and moved further up 3rd Street where it's level with the sidewalk. I'm going to say in the last 20 years, there's maybe been 4 or 5 different restaurants that have gone in and out of that space. To me, that's an indication of it's a difficult space to operate a restaurant, let alone any business, because of the issue with the grade.
Scott?
Hey, Dave, thanks for coming in. I know this isn't easy. Actually, one of the questions I have is based on this sheet that you handed out to us. When we established the TIF, talking about this development, we were talking about 20 school-aged kids for this development. In here, there's a line item that says the school-aged children per unit is 2.
Yeah.
That means that would be 388 children within this.
No, what we have encountered in this type of product that we have built in other communities, we average, and it's somewhat consistent with the St. Charles student generating calculation. You'd end up with about 1 student per 100 units, residential units, in this type of product. It's a different number if you're looking at 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom type homes. So what our projection is that we believe that we're going to generate 2 students in this building annually that will be in the Batavia public school system. That number that you're taking from there is part of a calculation that we do in our analysis, and that we're not entitled to the increment to what it costs to educate the number of students that this project will generate. So in our case, we think it's 2. We have to take out 2 times whatever the annual cost is to educate a child in the Batavia public school system. Those dollars then have to be paid, required by law, have to be paid by us. The city can't hang on to those dollars. Those dollars have to be forwarded onto the school district.
Right.
If there's more than 2, again, we're at risk. If there's more than 2, we have to pay for whatever number of children, again, are generated in the property and are in the Batavia public school system. So that's where that number and why that number may different. The TIF calculation may have used some other different ratio of the number of students generated.
Marty?
Yeah, we were just talking about the retail begets retail, and the major part of why I have the concern about removing the commercial retail from there is going back to the original discussions that the current downtown buildings are of such a challenging nature. They're old, they're not useful for today's businesses that do want to go in, that we were going to have 14,000 square feet of new retail that we could put in immediately that was going to make the other buildings more desirable to have people invest in them. Without that, we're going to have more people, and while that increases the value for that, or the value overall, aren't we going to have more people downtown with less buildings that are actually going to have walking traffic to get to, thereby kind of defeating the original purpose of making this the downtown destination where people can go, walk, shop, if you've got more people but less opportunity to do so?
We're not afraid of commercial space. We're not afraid of mixed use and encourage it. I believe in mixed use. I believe in the concept. And I heard the request of whether it was staff and or the council that we want retail. You want retail there. We put it in the plan. And I tried my damnedest to get it to work. But in the end of the day, you have to sit back and say, is this really valuable retail space? With the floors changing, the ceiling heights changing, really what's driving all that is this slope of Wilson. It's not Dave Patzelt or Shodin saying, hell with the commercial, we don't want commercial there, let's throw something else at it. We kept the commercial on River. You don't know it, but we actually looked at River Lane and said, can we make River deeper? The commercial space deeper, pull it further east, creating a larger space. And going back to our rock exploration, we think we're going to hit bedrock. We're going to be right back in the same boat if we pulled it back. We got a little more space out of it, a couple hundred feet, but we're afraid to continue to push that east. We're going to be in the bedrock, creating a very expensive retail or commercial space that you have to build. The cost of that space versus what it'll rent for, unfortunately, there's a big separation. The rental rates in downtown Batavia right now are only at about that $14, $16 a square foot. It's a shame. We need higher rental rates on the commercial. Bringing residential down there, if there puts a clamp down and there's all of the space is occupied, the existing space, what's going to happen to the rents of the downtown? Rents are going to go up. When the rents rise, some developers are going to come in and they're going to say, you know what? It now makes sense to build more commercial space. But the rents are going to be elevated. And when you do comps on it, you're going to show that those rents are up $18, $20, $22, which would be a great thing. So I guess I tried. We tried. We wanted to try to keep it. We understand the look. You wanted that. You come down Wilson Avenue. But in the end of the day, you just got to say, is it really that it's an expensive space for a little bit of rent? You got to make a change to it. So that's. I hope I'm trying to give some justification to your answer. I don't know that I have a straight answer other than I believe that more residential units are going to put further demand on the retail space, commercial space that's in the downtown. All the rents are going to rise, and there'll be more retail space. For maybe Shodin will come along and build a building across the street or do another building somewhere else. We'd love to. Once we're in the community, you know, and we want to continue to do more work. So, it just doesn't work. Just didn't make sense for us.
Elliot?
Well, one of the parts that I remember we struggled with this way back when was just the notion of parking. And to Marty's point, you know, we're losing the retail space there. So maybe that changes a bit of the demand to find parking, but I don't know that it does. We certainly expect, as we already have parking shortage now, that tearing out the original 129 spaces that we had, we were going to be gaining a net after that garage was built. But what I can't wrap my head around and liking on this is that not only are we losing parking spaces, 15 as I see it, we're adding 8 residential units. So how are we justifying that from a parking space issue? Because again, we had going into this at the onset, you know, if we're accounting for those original 129 units that we ripped out, about 1.18 spaces per unit. Now we're going down to just over 1 per unit. That's to me is a significant blow on the parking aspect of this project.
Maybe while Dave's reaching for information, I can address that question. as you remember, the parking study that Rich, parking analyst, completed for the city used the shared model concept, where a given parking space can be used by different users during different times of the day. The primary parking demand by the residential is in the evenings and on weekends. The primary parking demand for commercial is during the day. Restaurants go into the evening, certainly. So it's really difficult to say what is the teeter-totter, as Dave put it. We do know that residential parking demand per square foot is substantially lower than commercial. We also know that the direct loss on the proposal on State Street, that's loss of parking numbers, and that's increase in parking demand because there's residential. But it's possible that the conversion from commercial to residential on Wilson Street will have such an impact with respect to reducing demand, and knowing that they have demand times at different times of the day, it may not be a substantial change really on the demand versus the inventory in the parking deck. We don't know that. I think it's worth studying. I can't answer that question. We know that when we came out of the other parking study for the immediate block, this project overparked itself by 54 spaces. It overparked the block itself by some 35 spaces, and it overparked, I should say, it reduced the deficit across the study area, which was 600 feet radius around the project itself, by 12. So when all was said and done, this was a net improvement against what is an overall deficit. To me, 12 is a critical number. I would like to know, in studying, again, the new composition of the building and its related parking demand as a shared model methodology, what the net difference is to the project, what it is to the immediate block, and what it is to the six, approximately, I think it was 19 maybe, square block or affected block study area. And 12 is that number, because that's what we talked about with the business community. They said, this looks like it won't park itself. We said it more than parks itself. But we still have a parking problem. We do have a parking problem, but this actually reduces the problem. And it would be a good thing to know if this change in building composition and its resulting parking demand versus inventory created changes that overall net deficit change that affects the whole downtown study area. But until we get the green light, we haven't studied that.
I agree it would be good to know, because right now that net gain of 31 spaces getting dropped down to a net gain of 16 spaces, and at a cost of $2 million additional debt on the bonds, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around that when we lose retail.
I understand, but again, we don't. You're using actual count, net gain. When you look at it, well, and I know that's what faces us, the actual count. But you really, realistically, you need to look at the methodology and the shared concept, because the demand may not look like an actual change of 16 parking spaces, because the spaces that are being utilized during the peak time, which incidentally is about 1 o'clock on a Thursday or a Wednesday afternoon, that's the overall peak. If you look at, the spreadsheet, where the most demand is going to be in that study area for this parking garage. The new residential is not going to substantially affect that, and taking out the commercial will substantially improve it. But we need to use that same methodology that we used by Rich Associates to determine that. And again, just to follow up on that $2 million bond, I understand that's a big new number to everyone. But I can't stress enough that this really is a development pays its own way. This project will pay the cost of that debt, hopefully just through the incremental loan. But if not, we've got the backup SSA, and we've got the guarantees and the potential out-of-pocket cash payment. So, maybe I shouldn't be speaking on that. Maybe, and I don't mean to sandbag anybody else on staff, but we'll certainly. don't mean to anyways. Well, we can speak to that, and I think we won't recommend issuing a $16 million bond unless we've fully evaluated the capacity to pay it back. And certainly the revised RDA, the amendment to the RDA, will include that stipulation that whatever the debt is, on an annual basis, it's the developer's responsibility to pay it.
Different perspective. I know you're maybe learning too much about me tonight, but yeah, I'm a guy half glass, glass is half full. I'm also the type of, I'll call it manager that says, that's great, you got a problem. Make sure when you come to tell me about the problem, you have an answer. Not saying it's the right answer. So jump on the teeter-totter, if you would, with me. I got a solution. But with that solution, I've got a problem that came up. So this represents the lower parking deck. This is the upper parking deck. We know that, I described for you that these are two-story residential units entering outside from the direct access, and once I'm inside the unit, I go up to the upstairs bedrooms. Let's say that I got rid of these units along here, and I put perpendicular parking along here, and I did the same thing here. I can now take, I had 351 spaces, I can now get it to 365, so I'm giving you more parking spaces. Problem. How do I pay for it? It's problem one. And again, we're saying that they're $35,000 a space. So when I put residential there, I've shifted the cost of the construction of that portion of the building from the residential that's getting a rent income to pay the developer for that unit, plus it's generating revenue on an increment to pay the debt service of about $23,000 for those same parking spaces. So I'm losing that revenue on annual income to the debt of $23,000. I've now shifted cost to the parking garage of $35,000 per space times the 35 spaces. How do I pay for it? That's the problem. So I have a solution, but you're on the other side of the teeter-totter with me. If you want to pay for some additional parking spaces or help me through this other problem that it causes, you're my partner. I'll do it with you. So I appreciate it. We went through it. It's an option. I put the option out there on the floor. This area here, I can tell you that we will absolutely disagree. You can say, well, Dave, come here and put parking spaces. Well, I absolutely disagree with you. The reason? It's not a financial one there. We believe that the architectural elevation of this building on this side is superior with the residential than if that was just all parking and it looked like a damn parking lot. So just from an architectural appearance, our preference is that has to be some residential, either a retail or a residential, with that being the main elevation of the building. So even if it made financial sense, I'll tell you, we're not doing it there. And if you look at the drive aisles, you could say, oh, you could easily add parking. Yes, you could. So that side's a different issue than this side here. Unfortunately, with these being two-story units, if you call it on the first floor, it's automatic on the second floor, or vice versa. If you're going to do it on one, you got to do it on both. So there is now a huge surplus, and if we're concerned about parking spaces, then let's go at it and put the parking spaces in, but we got to find a way to pay for them. Don't take that, I'm not trying to be too sarcastic with you, but just trying to be, put it right on the table in front of you.
Dan?
After all that we have been through, I'm really angry that we have to be here tonight to talk about this project. But that said, I'm pleasantly surprised by what you've come up with. I say that because I know I have, and a lot of people up here have spent a lot of political capital defending this project, keeping a very open mind about it, and what we were delivering made it through Plan Commission, made it through HPC. You are wearing some battle scars as a result of that. My question is, are you going to make it through that process? Are they going to be okay with this? And I have a follow-up as well. Do you think you can make it through that process again?
I am prepared to go through that process. I think it was a rather challenging process last time. I know what's in front of me, but yes, I am willing to go through that process again, and I've been asked that by not just people in this building, but in another building. And I said, yeah, I believe in the project. I believe that we've got the right project and we're on the right track. Was there a screw-up? Yeah, there were some bad assumptions done. That was done by yours truly. If I have to go in front of the Plan Commission, I got to do it. It's part of the project, and I will go.
You answered the question that you're willing to go. I asked you, will you make it through? Do you
I believe I
think they're
will.
gonna- Do you think?
I believe I
they're
will,
gonna project?
yeah.
Okay.
I believe architecturally on the elevation, I think that with residential, call it the Texas wrap, I believe that we have a better looking building than what we had previously.
Which is my follow-up question. Do you think this is a better project?
Absolutely.
I would have waited. Then why didn't you propose it first?
Why?
If
Because
this is truly a better project, then this is probably what we should have seen first.
Because
Or
it
you should have twisted our arm and said, I got a better idea.
because of the commercial, I can tell you on Wilson, it was not throwing staff or anybody under the bus. I understood that the request was, we want commercial retail on Wilson. Fine, that's one of the ingredients, I got to use it, I got to put it in.
Had you presented it and said, you're only getting $14 a square foot right now, let me build you a nice project, let me create some demand for commercial,
Hey.
a block, I get it, looks like Ukrainian Village, it's cool, I like it. And there'll be stuff up the street that I think that might come from this, it's very possible. I feel like this is a better project, I wish we would have seen it first. That's-
I do too. It's a couple $100,000 expense in plans that we prepared. But to the $14, that first page, I had $14 on it. And I have to admit that here I even went back to Chris in the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks and said, what is $14 still the number in downtown Batavia? And $14 is the number. It's not changing. So it was one of the ingredients, and I assumed that and heard the call that we want it.
And I hear you taking responsibility for being here, but and I'm not trying to be snarky, there's a part of me that wishes I could just hear you say you're sorry for bringing us here tonight. I got to go back to my residents with this.
I apologize. I am sorry. It's my fault. And I clearly understand that if you don't want to be my partner any longer, that you'll send me on my way. I don't like that, but I am sorry that I did that. I can't say enough and put the numbers on the screen right in front of you and show you that, yes, it was my error.
Thank you.
Scott?
Just going back to the parking, and this is a big deal. We have a deficit. I know, Chris, you had said that according to studies, 1 o'clock on a Thursday is the high water mark. I work downtown, and I've parked over there at 1 o'clock on a Thursday. It's not a problem. 7 o'clock on a Friday now, that's hard. That's tough. So, and the way things are going downtown, it's just going to get tougher. So this parking deficit is a big deal because the tide is turning downtown, and it's wonderful. It's a great problem, but it's going to become a bigger problem. So I don't think we can minimize the loss of this parking because we've got a paved parking lot over there that's going to go away eventually, but that thing's full. So it needs to be addressed.
Mike?
Dave, couple of things. When you say, we're partners and that you're willing to walk away, you don't want to, but if we want to part company, you're good with that. I just take that as a kind of a cavalier attitude. I mean, you have skin in the game. We have a lot more skin in the game, and we had a bloodletting in town here to get this thing passed through. Okay, so that just puts the hair in the back of my neck up. Okay, when I hear that. So beyond that, as Dan, I'm pleasantly surprised. Okay, I was pretty upset that we had to come back here, but I'm pleasantly surprised. And I know you're accepting responsibility only with words, obviously, but I think, how did this happen? I mean, this isn't your first rodeo. It's not your first barbecue. You've done this before, that you would make such a huge error in in budgeting this. So I have to ask you then, I look at it and I think, if you made the error now and we're here, and as Dan asked, you're going to go all through the process again, and you're confident you're going to get done, you only have conceptual drawings, so I'm always in the back of my head, how'd they get any figures with conceptual drawings that you don't have, you didn't buy in wholly like we did and get drawings and say, this is what I want you to bid. I mean, everything is conceptual, everything is just kind of like a budgeted number. I don't, if this is approved, I don't want to come back again. I want this to be a done deal. We have an RDA, everyone said, yeah, we're on board. All 14 members of this council said, we're in, we're in. And now we're back, and we don't want to come back again. So if this is a done deal, you have to assure somehow, give assurances that you're not going to come back 8 months from now and say, well, you know, I figured it wrong again because my drawings are only conceptual. We want some commitment. I know you have money in it, you have skin in the game, but we just need that commitment. We can't go back to the people and say, hey, another $2 million. I mean, I'm not doing it. That I won't do.
We are in. We're committed to building it. We, working with the contractors that have bid this, believe that we're on the right track and have made some significant changes in the costs. So we think that we've isolated the issue or the problem, and we're fixing that problem. So we're full steam ahead. The other biggest driver that I think we have, and it's a feather in our cap, is that when we were at concept drawings, we didn't have a lender. Guess what? We got a lender that's ready to write us the loan for the damn building. You know how bad I don't want to, you know, it's tough to get banks to lend you money. With a lender standing there saying, ready to write you the check, and I got to say, well, time out. I can't take your money? That's tough. So it behooves us and all of us to get this approved as quick as possible. And I know I got to go through the plan commission. The lender so far is willing to hang in there with us, and that hurdle we've jumped. Although we had to turn around and come back, we don't have to jump it again as long as we can hang on to that lender. So having the lender in hand is a huge part of the process. I don't know if that gives you any further support or that we're in, but yeah, we've got almost all the tools in place except I got a fucked up plan.
Well,
Sorry.
I'm going to say one other thing too. If I can't speak for anyone else, if this passes and we say, okay, we're in this, let's get it done. As soon as possible, I want to see a shovel in the ground.
Me too.
We're all saying that. I mean, we don't want to delay this for weather, for anything. They build all kinds of buildings in wintertime. I mean, it's time to put the shovel in the ground and build, and no more screwing around.
I agree. I agree.
Dave, that kind of gave me the opportunity to jump in here before I keep asking anybody else what they want, what Mike was saying. And you've mentioned partnership quite a few times. And with any partnership, you should feel free to be able to say whatever you need to say, right? So I'm going to say something. And I came to this meeting tonight with not a very good feeling, as I think most everybody sitting here. And I think maybe because, right or wrong, the perception has been that Shodine, they've been around a long time, and they know how to do what they know how to do. And one of the things I think the perception is they know how to get a project in front of a city council and get it very close, and then say, well, we're close, but I got to have this or I can't go any further. So I came to the meeting tonight feeling that way. I don't know if that's the case or not. You know, the feeling I had was, you know, you're just looking to get something more out of the city to increase your profits because that's what you're in business for. But my question to you, I guess, is if the city were to go along with the additional $2 million in TIF funding, you're still somewhere between $4 and $6 million over budget. Now, you've answered a lot of the questions with, you can increase the revenue with the retail space and so on and so forth, some design changes, what have you. Is that going to make up the $4 to $6 million? Number one question. And the other, number two question is, can't you get it closer than a $2 million spread of what you're over budget on? And that kind of goes to what Mike was saying about how you're going to, how solid of a deal is this?
The plan that you have in front of you, this revised plan, works. Plain and simple, it works. The numbers work. The savings that we're going to be able to pull out of this and the additional revenue, it works. I provided a financial pro forma. You think I'm making more profit? Send it back to Kane McKenna, direct staff to send it to the consultant, have them look at it. It's the same analysis, different numbers, different quantities with more accurate construction costs and more accurate rental rates. Send it to them. I don't think I've heard all the comments from all the gossip mills that, oh yeah, Chodine's doing their typical moving the goalpost again. No, it's not. I've provided you a financial pro forma a year plus ago, and I'm providing you a financial pro forma today. Tell me how much more profit I'm putting in my pocket if you give me an additional TIF increment of the $2 million. You can see it. It's right on the sheet. Staff wanted copies of the construction estimates. Nothing to hide. I gave the estimates. Here's the estimates that we got from the other general contractors. You could take those numbers and compare to what I had in the pro forma. They don't match. Significantly higher cost. Why? I think staff, myself, our architect, the light bulb went on when we were sitting with your consultant in Lombard. It's what we thought it was the parking garage, and it is. Now we know what is the cost for those spots. Problem is, we have not built 2 levels of parking structure underneath residential. We have not built 2 levels of parking structure below ground. That's the problem. We checked if the 23.5 for a parking space, we checked it recently with a parking garage that was built in St. Charles on their First Street project. It's right in target with what they paid for that parking garage. Parking garage out of the ground. It's not buried in the ground. Sure, is it 3 or 4 feet in the ground? Yeah, 3 or 4 feet or so of it is in the ground. So I thought I had a right number. I can tell you, if I build 2 levels of parking underground, I'm not going to use that number again. It doesn't work. So, David, the numbers, we believe 100% in the current plan. We've run the numbers backwards and forwards. You think we're making additional profit? Take a look at the pro formas. Ask the consultant, are they putting all the money in their pocket? I don't think he's going to give you the answer that, yes, we are.
I also would like to say that I was pleasantly surprised with what I saw also. The facade, the appearance of it, the aesthetics of it, I think is much nicer than what we had approved previously. Scott, you had something else? Or Alan?
I have 2 things. One, I'm a little concerned with the State Street side of the building with entrances and exits to the apartments onto the sidewalk. How much additional room is that going to eat up on the sidewalk? Are we going to lose sidewalk access along there? Because it is also entrances in and out of the parking lot on that street.
Currently, I'm trying to find that slide just so I have it.
Because I know that they come out.
Currently, there's been many hours spent on trying to redesign State Street. I can tell you there's been several different options. Currently, State Street has diagonal parking on the north side and parallel parking on the south side. We actually were trying to figure out, can we get diagonal parking on the south side and increase the parking count, not in a garage, but even on the street? And staff can tell you that we've been back and forth on, okay, what dimension do we want to use for the diagonal 2 lanes of diagonal parking. There's actually been discussions about, do we make that a one-way street? I was the first to say absolutely not. I don't want to make that a one-way street. I think it's too difficult to get in and out of the garage. It needs to be 2 ways. One way would make it narrower back a curb to back a curb. So are there still some quirks and problems with it? Yes, there are. Is it a little tight? Yes, it is. It is a little tight. What are we doing with the ultimate parking on that south side? Is it diagonal? Is it parallel? Is it parallel on the north and parallel on the south? So there's more study work that needs to be done, but at some point I had to call the question, and as staff actually called the question, they said, you're coming to city council on the 10th. And it turned out it was the 11th, but so I had to come to council with what I had. So it still needs some more work. What is going on there? Is it going to go up? Is it going to go up or down? The count? It could. I think it can work with those exits directly out onto State Street.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about was basically we're going to kick in another, well, it's coming from the increment that's created, but there's another over 10% adding another $2 million into this to throw at this from the TIF side of it. I don't have the numbers in front of me, we don't have the pro forma in front of me, but is Shodine as a corporation willing to kick back 10% of what they've got listed as 9 or 10%? Is their numbers in here for their profit?
But
they have some skin back into the game as we're giving up something. Does the developer want to give it? We're partners. Should we both take a hit for the mistakes that were made?
Well, when you're looking at the profit, you're looking at the general contractor profit, right? Is that the profit line? So if Shodine doesn't hire Shodine Construction to build it, that we end up hiring another contractor, there's nothing to give back. So, no.
Okay.
Marty?
When I thought about this project originally, it was a way to modernize and update our downtown. And I go back to the street front, storefront, and why that was so important was because, yes, we're adding density to our downtown, but we're still trying to keep that character and look of what the downtown is, and even extend the downtown to give a larger feel for it in this narrow town that we have. And it got compared to Arlington Heights and Mount Prospect and those things. And I accepted that in the kind of the way of the world. You need to diversify and kind of rebuild your downtown with adding the diversity. That was the model. But as we're sitting here tonight, as we're talking about the design of this and that it's more residential, you just brought up Ukrainian Village. That doesn't do it for me because now we're moving further away, closer to the city, of what the character of this downtown is. We're doing less of what our neighbors are kind of doing, and we're trying to now go to a very urban look, very urban location without urban amenities. And I just think the more that we're trying to get closer to a downtown Ukrainian Village look, we're moving even further away from what the original character of this downtown, which is what we were trying to preserve yet still modernize a little bit. So I don't know if the project that we're looking for is even this at all, that it's something completely different with more storefront and maybe even less commercial. I don't know. Maybe it is go back to pulling back to our roots and start looking what we want for our area in the downtown. Maybe it isn't as big as we want it to be. Just my thoughts.
Mark?
Yeah, back to I kind of agree with you on the retail on Wilson. I know it's one of the cons that we think it might cut off our growth to the east. That, there's several, especially on the north side of Wilson, there's several homes that, have some businesses in them, but that doesn't mean that can't change. And you start, I don't want to compare us to Geneva, but you start thinking of downtown Geneva where there's old homes that are, the retail establishments. I feel it almost cuts us off. I'm sure you've run the numbers to say, what if we do keep the retail there and not convert it to apartments? Or not converted, yeah, I'm sorry, not converted back to apartments. The other thing is, Alan asked a question about kicking back. I came in here with an absolute, it was completely against any of the changes, and if I switch what I'm thinking, I'm going to eat crow, because I've already been talking to people about it, that I wasn't comfortable with what was being presented. Are there other creative ways that you can kick back something to the city? I've been involved in other areas that a developer bought an ambulance for the city. We have plenty of things coming up in the fire department that are going to need replacing. It would be a donation from Shodine. I'm sure you guys would get a great tax credit for a donation of something like that. Something creative to put a little bit more pressure on you guys to show that you're willing to give more to this.
Will you give more? Will you, the city, give more?
You're asking
Asking us
for
to.
you're asking for
The
more.
2 million, you're giving it to me?
Well, we're giving it's not just 2 million.
No, you're giving me the 2 million? Because my interpretation, you're giving a loan of 2 million. I still have to pay, you want me to guarantee that 2 million, and you want me to pay that 2 million back. So I don't see that as a gift of 2 million, I see it as a loan that you'll lien the property for that 2 million. So,
But it is still a property that you're still going to make a profit off of. If we say
check the
no,
pro forma, check the pro forma, and
you're still making a profit. You're not, this isn't a charity. I get it. You were
Yep.
making a profit before on what you did before. You're going to make a profit, even if it's the same profit. It's still something that you're getting.
I'll consider giving $1 for every dollar you give. You may not know the RDA, and I'm not being sarcastic, but we had said that after the TIF, we're partners, we're splitting everything 50-50, as long as I have TIFable expenses left. So let's do the same thing on the upfront.
Nick?
No, I just wanted to know, that was a question, but what's the structure tonight? Are we going to allow public comment? Are we going to go into discussion? We're kind of at a Q&A point now, but what did you have in mind?
Well, I
Structure.
kind of envisioned doing exactly what we're doing, where we're having discussion, at the same time we're asking questions, and then certainly I was going to ask if the public had any comments.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted clarity.
Susan?
When we have been working on this project, I know that the site, the elevation of the site, the slope, the river valley has always brought in a lot of challenges. And I think I've asked this before, but I can't remember. This has been going on so long. Why was it built in a 3-prong instead of closing off those ends so that it was a solid facade with more units on the Washington Street side, so that there would be more units in where the open ends of the prongs are? For some reason in my mind, I kind of remember that renting apartments that have just an interior courtyard view, it wasn't as desirable. Am I thinking through that correctly? Or was there another reason you didn't do that?
So I want to make sure I understand your question. Why did we not close this?
Yes, and add
Close
more
those
units.
prongs off?
Exactly, like add 2 units per floor to get additional revenue.
The couple responses to that. First off, the main entrance to the buildings are here in the core. So we believe that we got it, if we bring you in here at the end of the building and your apartment's back here, although you're walking the same number of steps, if we break that up between you're walking outside through an open courtyard and then you're walking inside the building, you'll feel more comfortable than you would if you came into the building here and walked down this long hallway and came to your unit. So if you close this off, the entrance would have to be either on this end or this end of the building. The other, believe it or not, we think that the historic old school is picturesque, something unique to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So albeit it's a 90-degree view, when you're standing out on your balcony, you're going to turn your head and you're going to see the historic structure. So we think that is a nice nice view, and believe that the prongs here almost frame that, as you're standing on the balcony looking to the east, they'll frame that, that view for you. But sure, I wish I had on my slide the Arboretum. It's the Texas, they have the Texas wrap, and they have the Texas donut, and they have the Texas two-step. Well, the Texas donut is a four-sided building, and the Arboretum, they did the Texas wrap around the parking lot, and then they did the Texas donut. And that's exactly that. They closed this off, and that is an internal courtyard.
Right.
It's,
I've been in that building, and, I think the views from, the courtyard views don't bother me because, as we've been talking, Marty talked about, an urban type. I am a more urban thinker, and so that's why I was looking at this thinking, well, if we need to maximize the amount of units in a building to maximize the amount of return on investment, does it make sense to close those ends off and have entrances where those prongs would be to move them out to the Wilson Street or the Washington Street facade? I didn't know if it was because of the site layout or because of some other, where the stairways lie, where...
No, it was truly that, the walking distance from the drop-off to the units in the back and trying to break up that walk, kind of like walking into a hotel that you haven't been to and you're looking for your number and you're walking and walking and walking and you can only look at so many pilasters and so many trade ceilings until you get to your room. So that was the concept here. But certainly something, if that was the question, we could go back and look at potentially closing that off. Again, courtyard is very private. Your view is just of the courtyard, and you lose the view of the historic structure to the east, school, I believe it is.
I'm just looking at compromises for losing retail and parking versus making it a profitable building that has ROI. So that's why I'm looking at how do you maximize the footprint, and you only have so much ground to work with here. How do you maximize that to get the most amount of units, to keep the most amount of parking, and to also keep retail to keep everybody happy? And so,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, my son lives in a Marquette building in Wheaton, and I've gone to the wrong apartment several times because it's a long walk down a lot of different
Is that
corridors.
121 Water? No.
It's Courthouse Square.
Courthouse Square?
Yeah. So.
There's a project, suggest all of you, if you, in your spare time, Google 121 Wheaton and take a look at that. That building is it's a Texas, the Texas donut.
Yeah.
And if you ever get inside the building, literally you enter the door here and you walk, and if your apartment is right there, because of the break in the building, you walk all the way around, and it's about 700-800 feet of hallway that you walk to get back to your apartment.
But for some reason, they don't seem to have any problems renting them.
No, they don't. And the building's recently sold at a value of like $2.40 a square foot. So it's huge.
Dave?
Lucy?
I am surprised too. I like this plan better than the old
Lucy,
plan.
use the mic, please.
I like this plan better than the plan that we saw before.
Thank you.
Sometimes I think that you have to go through a few plans until you get to the right plan. I think that happens sometimes. And I am not disappointed that the retail's not here. And I suspicion that as we bring all these rooftops to town, that it will create a demand. I don't think we're going to lose the opportunity to have retail. I think we're going to create a demand. That's what I hope, and that's what I think will happen. I don't see this building cutting off opportunities for continued retail growth. I'm not sure if Scott has any insight into this, and I think that our original objectives of the project are still being met with the presentation that we have seen tonight. So I'm in support of it as it stands.
Thank you.
Nick?
I just want to clarify, earlier you had said on the retail, from an estimated standpoint, about $250 a square foot.
That's retail sales.
Right, and we get
Yes.
2% of that. That's across what time period?
Annually.
Annually, okay. Okay. My thought on this, I mean, I run those numbers, and across the life of a TIF, we lose over $1 million. So we do give up something, giving up retail space. Why I was able to wrap my arms around this project to begin with was the whole concept of economic development, and I'm sure it'll still be there. But I can't help but think down the line. The one thing I go back to is oftentimes there's developments that are, you never remember the missed opportunities, but I could look around and go, boy, I wish we didn't do that, because now we're stuck with it for 100 years. Is this perfect? And I think that Wilson Corridor is a perfect example of, without retail on there, I think we're making a big mistake. The numbers on those estimates are $1 million in revenue over the life of a TIF. We do give up 16 parking spots, which were gold to us when we were first going through this process. Now we're like, oh, 16, and we can wipe it across because there's not as much retail, which I thought was the whole concept behind this, is to drive more retail. But we also are adding 8 residences, which at the low estimate of 1.1 parking spot per residence is probably 9 to 12 more automobiles that need parking spots. So we're giving up more than just 16 spots. We're giving up retail sales. We're giving up, in my mind, the whole purpose of why I wanted this. I don't want more, I mean, to just throw more apartment buildings downtown isn't adding to the character or what, you know. I was in this to drive development and to build more retail shops, and development begets development. So I still, although I have no, like the look and whatnot, I have no problem with, I still think we are giving up too much, and who knows what else is out there. This is a 100-year decision, not a 3-year decision that we have to make. So that's my 2 cents.
Scott?
I'm going to look at it from just a slightly different standpoint, and more of a creative sort of viewpoint as one comes into our town. Part of our job as a council is to cast vision, and what do we want for our community to look like 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years from now. We want it to be engaging. We want it to be open. We want it to be something as people drive in that we're proud of. Part of my vision when with the original project, having that retail on the Wilson side, is it's engaging as you drive in. Taking all the numbers out of it, whatever. It's a different vibe when you drive in and you just see wall of retail or wall of resident. What from a purist standpoint, from a dreamer standpoint, we want we want to be proud of how our town looks when it comes in. I know that we're embracing kind of that urban style, and we need the amenities to back it up. We talked about the economic hand grenade. When you bring in this retail, and I'll stand by that. I do think we give up a lot by losing that retail, because that does beget other retail. We're already starting to see it. So that's one of those things that I'm disappointed in. I know you're coming back with some revisions here to try and make this work. I think Susan's kind of thinking outside the box a little bit, so to speak, with trying to maybe take out some of the courtyard, adding some residential units in there. I would hate to see us lose that retail presence on the Wilson side, because I think it makes a big difference for our town as you drive in. I really do. And again, it's not a numbers thing. It's not an economics thing. It is purely how are we perceived as we drive in.
Mike?
And I totally agree with Scott and Nick. I think once we build residences, the retail's gone forever. And I don't know, I just don't see people living on that corner. To me, that was a prime retail location, and it kind of flows with the rest of Wilson Street as we're going down Wilson Street. We got a slew of retail, and then at that particular point, we're going to stop and have this residential in it. I don't know, retail and commercial is what kind of sold this property for me, and I hate to give that up, and I think we're all struggling. There's a number of us that are struggling with this issue.
Hey, Drew?
All right, so we've had the three of you who have had concerns about losing the retail. I'll take sort of an alternate view. When Chris was doing his presentation, one of the places he mentioned was Elmhurst, and I used to live in Elmhurst. And for a long time, if you drive up and down York Road, south of the train tracks was kind of a funky dead zone, not too much unlike Wilson Street. And I don't know what it was now, 10, 15 years ago, they put up a big apartment complex on the east side of York Road, and it comes right out to the sidewalk. The door into the building is right off the sidewalk. There is no retail. But since that's gone up, the 3 blocks south of the railroad tracks down to where that building starts on the east side and all the way down in front of it on the west side is completely filled up. It's new restaurants, new retail. I mean, the whole character of that part of town changed. And the catalyst was having that. So, and if you're driving into town, and north on York Road, you're driving into downtown Elmhurst, one of the first things you see is on the right, nice big apartment building, across the street, shops, and then you're into downtown. I don't see that Wilson Street, especially with the big developable lot across the street, being that much different. I also see the lot across the street not having some of the challenges for retail that are on the project side of the street. You have an opportunity over there for some higher quality retail space that in theory should be easier to rent, command bigger rents than the trying to wedge it into different levels, and not negating the challenges they've got with the project. So the loss of retail on that perspective doesn't particularly scare me. In fact, it may in fact end us up with some higher quality retail in the long run. It's just not getting it right this instant. We may have to wait a little bit and be patient for it, but I think it's going to come with it. I mean, the density will make it attractive to people to put the money into it and do it.
May I speak to that point? Mike, you indicated that when you go down Wilson Street, you see this, existing retail corridor, and, why not grow that? But when you really think about it, at least east of the river, and I would even argue west of the river to some extent, Wilson Street is not much a retail corridor. I mean, you can name the uses. You've got Gaetano's, but then you've got Foltos, and you've got Riverview Counseling, and you have the Bulldog Bar, but that's mostly subterranean. That space on the floor is not retail. Across the street, you've got the bank, you've got Pure Eye. You do have the metaphysical shop where there's some retail, but, her uses are real strong downstairs in therapy. You have Fawn Gifts, you have the dance studio. I would argue that you've got quite a bit of space that's potentially retail. And I think that could convert over time to be retail once there's a demand. I can't speak enough about the importance of and the impact of residential right in your downtown. I think that's, if you build it, the rest will come. I believe that. I believe that's the trigger. Having the consumers downtown, having the shoppers, the diners, the body count that will be available to shop and dine in downtown will be so significantly more readily available and just in raw numbers present that the spaces that are paying $8 or $9 a square for, you know, Buddha Gandhi and me or something are going to be ultimately paying, you know, 15, 16, upwards teens dollars a square foot as retail and restaurant space. I'm not sure of it, but I think there's a good chance of it. And I certainly, you know, we're only looking at 4 additional residential, so I'm not going to say those 4 residential versus a commercial is a bigger bang for the buck. You know, certainly retail sales could occur on that space on Wilson. I think Nick, your numbers, you know, they're fairly ambitious. I mean, you're probably considering.
I just used the numbers he gave me.
No, but you're probably considering all 9,000 square feet as being retail. I don't know that that'd be the case, and you're probably looking at 100% occupancy, and that may not. I don't know what your numbers are, but my experience is that retail space, when it goes vacant, it stays vacant longer than residential space. It's harder to turn over, and that's just the case. I think for longer term vitality and maximum occupancy, I think the apartments will stay occupied more. From the beginning, I said that there is a loss by not having that retail, and not just because of its actual use that we looked at, but because it was part of selling the project. It was a significant component in getting it through the Plan Commission and meeting the objectives of the comp plan, the strategic plan. But all I'm saying is that under this revised plan, we don't get it there, but I believe we'll get it elsewhere and much more quickly than if we don't have the project. And as you pointed out, as Drew pointed out, across the street would be a ripe spot for it. And I don't think truncating a half a block or eliminating half a block of retail or even commercial use, office service, will necessarily be a fatal blow to East Wilson Street corridor, not compared to the potential positive impact of generating all those new consumers, you know, from the apartment complex. So I just wanted to speak to that point.
Can I just respond though? Because that was, I agree. Never did I say I didn't want the numbers downtown or whatnot, but this is, if this was Siemens property, like, fine, whatever. This is adjacent to River Street, our prime jewel. We have one shot to do it right. If we don't, it's 100 years of looking at that. So that's why I raised the concerns. I want the people, I was a big supporter of this project, but I want it to be right. So that's, by no means is this I don't believe this is it or nothing. That's not the option here. I think we can go back to the drawing board, and now that everything's torn down, this is a viable lot for many developers to come up with some creative ideas to get what we want for the next 100 years.
Mayor?
Yeah, I'd like to just take a minute and tell you about my day. I was, as you know, I didn't get here till 8 o'clock, and I started this morning out at 6 o'clock in the morning because I had to get on a train and go to Chicago for a joint meeting of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning's Executive Committee and the State Transportation Committee. So we get in there to this meeting, and we had all the big wigs in the region sitting here, and we got into this discussion about how Illinois has a revenue problem. Well, surprise, surprise, we all know it. But when we got into, well, you know, we should have done this and we should have done that because we really need to generate more revenue for ourselves because we got this multi-billion-dollar gap in transportation funding that's really starting to grab a hold and bite into us. And so I sit here and I look at this, and I'm not going to get into the arguments about the retail or the design of it, but I would just offer you up that this building, I think, and this complex and this redevelopment offers some real opportunities for Batavia, and Alderman McFadden just hit upon them. And rather ironically, after I left Chicago, I came back to Geneva, got off the train and got in my car, and then I drove back over to Arlington Heights for a meeting with the Regional Transportation Authority people. And one of the people who is on the board that I'm on is the former mayor of Elmhurst. And somewhat ironically, about 7 o'clock tonight, he says to me, his family owns a business just south of Batavia here, down on Church Road, so he's in here with some regularity. He says, Jeff, he says, I was in Batavia the other day and I was pretty impressed with what I saw. He says, you know, what's with this River Street thing? He says, that was really a neat little feature you put in, and I was telling him about it, and he says, you know, he says, when I was mayor of Elmhurst, I'm the goat that built that 12-story building that you see there just north of the railroad tracks. And he says, I took a lot of grief about it. And there was a lot of people that shot at me and they're politically and wrote things in the paper and on the internet and everything else. But he says, at the end of the day, that's kind of the golden goose in downtown Elmhurst now. Not only does it supply lots of customers on a daily basis for the downtown stores because they can walk within 2 blocks, and that's where most of downtown Elmhurst is, on York Road, which is just to the west of the building. He says, but beyond that, he says, the taxes that are coming off that thing are really a nice shot in the arm for a town that didn't have any room to grow. We were pretty much annexed out. We didn't have any place to go, but we threw that building in town, and he says, you know, that's big money for us now, and that's what's shooting a big vein of support into the school district and into the city coffers. And he says, we're able to pay a lot of bills with this thing. He says, you know, it's, you know, we're running now toward 15 years of since we put it up, and it's every year it looks a little bit better. So I just sit here and I think of this and I say to myself, you know, in 15 or 20 years, as this TIF begins to get paid off, I got to believe there are those who will follow us in office here will think this was not a bad move by Batavia to do this in some form or fashion, that we took this property and really turned it into something that generates a big spark plug of money into the coffers of the community. Now, if you look at the developer that we have here, they're interesting people in the history of our area because we've often referred to what we call the Tri-Cities, Batavia, Geneva, and St. Charles. And if you really wanted to be visionary and open it up, we probably should change the name. Of course, it's already taken by the folks out on the Mississippi River, but we probably should call ourselves the Quad Cities, because Mr. Shodine and company were the ones that went out there and bought this big area of farmland and got the county, I believe the number was 1,950, approved them to build 1,954 units, of which they had to build their own utility systems for, which they did. And we cut a little sidebar deal with them to build a water plant right next to theirs. And the idea was if they ever had a water main break, they could tap into Batavia's water. And that's all good cooperation. But at the end of the day, that Mill Creek out there represents one huge bonus for the community of Batavia. And what they were what these gentlemen did was they were smart enough to see that that property they were buying was in the presence of 2 school systems, Batavia and Geneva, that were highly regarded. And that's probably the nut that really drags in the real estate customers, because people come in there and about the only fight I hear we have out there is if you're by on the south end of the site, there's 404 houses that are in Batavia School District. And if you buy north of that, there's 1,500 that are in Geneva. And I guess sometimes people go out there and buy the wrong house because they want one school district or the other. But they're 2 darn good school districts, and that's what's helping to bring it. But the real beauty of that is that Shodine and company went out there, and they're not on any main road, so it was pretty hard to, I think, peddle any kind of retail or business out there. So there's a small retail thing there in the center, but it's very small. But what we have out there now is several thousand residents, and I'll multiply that number out a couple of times, I think, that when they need to buy a loaf of bread or they need a gallon of gas or they need to go to the cleaners or the post office or whatever they do, they have no place to go but come into Randall Road or into Batavia and Geneva and do their shopping. So we've got like this bonus town out there that is coming in, dropping all kinds of thousands of dollars of sales tax on us, and there's some extra value for our school district to attach to. So Shodine in their presence in our area has done some really good things that we have benefited from very, very strongly. So as a community, I think this is, somebody already said, this is a far-sighted decision that's going to take many years to realize. But I would really hope that whatever you decide to do here, that we do allow this to be some type of a intensified development there that generates over the long haul some significant, number one, customers for the area, and secondly, some huge amount of property tax that will be able to support the governments in town in a time when probably when this thing comes off the TIF rolls and goes on to the property tax, we may be out of buildable property in Batavia. And with Fermilab about to renew themselves for another 50 years, and with 1,500 acres out there around Nelson's Lake, it's off the, now all part of a county forest reserve, we don't have a lot of land left here to build on. So something like this, with a lot of money coming out of the downtown, I think is going to look like the golden goose in about 15 or 20 years for whoever on the governments of Batavia at that point in time. So I just share that with you because all that just kind of came together in my life today as I'm outside of Batavia traveling around to these other meetings. And I'm talking to the people, specifically when Drew brought up about that building in Elmhurst. We had just talked to the mayor 2 hours before about that particular building and what good things it's done for Elmhurst. So that's my day.
Dave.
Thank you.
Dave.
Mike?
Well, I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Lucy, and I agree with Drew. And I think to Nick's point, we're looking at it, and that's why we've been talking about it, and we had major discussions, and Plan Commission was very, very adamant on materials in the building, is to do it right the first time. But I have to agree with Drew and Lucy and the mayor and say that this is going to be good for future use. But the most important thing, and I'm still pretty upset about having to redo this anyway. I mean, I think Shodine, for all their history and everything, this being a river town, should have recognized the full fact that we have hills here, for one thing. But water under the bridge, what we're dealing with today is, are we going to do this? And when this was first presented to us, I mean, I was a strong proponent of it then because I thought this was a game changer for our city. I've always felt that. And can we let it go? Sure, we can let it go. Will someone else come in? Someone else will come in. They might come in 2-3 years from now to get the whole ball rolling again. The most important thing I still see also is that, you know, we'll get a parking deck. It's not ideal. We want more spaces. But it's all going to be paid for by the TIF that they're generating, and it's all guaranteed payment. So really, the city and the residents of Batavia are not going to pay anything for this. And that is a big thing. And so I think that's an important thing to keep considering. We might not get that deal again, next developer coming in. So that's always in the back of my mind is, you know, I know residents are coming forward and saying, you know, it's a bad deal, don't do it. But the residents of our town will not pay anything for this. It's all going to come out of the TIF. And so I think that's an important consideration. So
Here's what I'd like to do. Since it's getting late at night, and since we do have quite a few people here in the audience that have followed this project since the beginning, just like we have, and since you've all heard everything tonight for the first time, just like we have, I'd like to hear what you have to say, what you think of what you've heard tonight, if you would like to get up and share those thoughts with us. So if you do, please come on up to the podium and give us your name and tell us what you think of the presentation you saw here tonight and the discussion you heard. Don't be bashful, just jump up there.
Hi, the name's Sylvia Keppel. First question, is this being recorded on BATV?
Yes, it is. It's being broadcast.
Good. I'm going to ask you to please go back and watch the recording when you're not sitting here, when everything's new and everything's emotional, and you're getting face-to-face with someone presenting. Perhaps even look away while Mr. Petzelt is speaking. I want you to see something. Mr. Petzelt is a very good salesman, and he's also very manipulative, and I'll tell you why. That's why I want you to watch and listen. He buddies up to you with the term partner. He uses all these rhetorical devices. to make you feel like you're really part of this. And he's very good. But I want you to listen to that when you're distanced from him and you're not watching it, you're not sitting here. Sometimes the second time hearing it, or if you're hearing it when you're distanced from it, you'll have a more objective view of it. And then when an alderman challenged him, it was not a very nice attack that he launched on him. That was not called for. So please watch and listen and try to distance yourself. Look at the facts. I'm going to ask you to look at where it was brought up. I've got a whole bunch of little notes on here. Remember that there's going to be no benefit for 23 years. It was said here tonight there will be no benefit to the rest of the city for 23 years from the taxes. And if you lose the sales taxes, the rest of the city will not see any benefit from it at all for 23 years. And in fact, it could end up paying because the school district has to, you're assuming that there's going to be 2 students for the whole development. But what did Mayor Schilke say that brought people to Mill Creek? It was the schools. So if the schools are such a big draw for the area, what's to say that these 194 apartments won't be a big draw for families with children? And 2 children, I've always said, was unrealistic for this development. And that's all that they're counting on, 2 children. But yet, you say what draws people, Mayor's always said that what draws people to Batavia are the schools.
These are 1 and 2 bedroom though.
There's half of them are 2 bedroom, and that's plenty of room for children. And there's it was 99 before, it's now more than that.
I'm not going to argue with you. I don't think we'll get that many from this type of a development.
But it's also, but it is the biggest draw. You always say the biggest draw are the schools. And there's also, say this type of development, we've now bumped it up. One of the big selling points of this before was going to be affordable housing. They tossed around the term affordable housing. That's what CMAP calls for. Batavia needs more affordable housing. And now you've gone to high-end housing, even with an undisclosed amount of rent. How does that fit in with your long-range plans or your CMAP plans? Because that was always a selling point. Question is, why are you suddenly down on retail? Mr. Asen was playing down the retail. But that was the big selling point of this. This is going to bring people in, and now retail's not so important. I don't get it. And if you look through, there was one newspaper article about St. Charles, had to do with the old St. Charles Mall, and that's Shodine property too. And at one point there is a quote from, I believe it was Mr. Petzelt there too, that they were trying to put in apartments. They were decided that, and the quote was along the lines that retail commercial is no longer viable. We need more apartments. And I just find it kind of ironic that all of a sudden now we're in apartments. The retail is gone. And there's no excuse for underestimating the amount of cost for digging into the bedrock. You knew it. You all knew it. That was a big, big point of discussion. And Shodine should have had especially if the one consultant knew very well and said that's reasonable, that $35,000 per space is reasonable. There's no reason that Shodine should not have known that from the beginning. If he had done his homework, he should have known that, because that was a point of discussion that you all brought up about what was down there and what are you going to find under the ground. The whole thing about buildings, the retail not working on commercial retail not working with that grade, it worked before. You had insurance, an insurance business there. You had a dentist office there. It worked for them. Why not make it work again?
No sales tax with either of those.
Right, but it was still, the building worked. They were able to make it, and it's maybe not ideal, but you see it all along Wilson Street on either side of the river. You got the banks, and you know what you're dealing with. You know that that's going to be, you have to figure into that, and that should have been planned for. The number of parking spaces. I'd like you to really look and think about those numbers. 335 spaces, what you'd be left. Subtract 129. You have 129 spaces right now. And that leaves you with 206 parking spaces for 194 units. So everybody in those 194 units can only have one car. Only 12 units can have a second car. And then you start cutting into the existing number of parking spaces and you start working at a deficit. And you will have spent $16 million for losing parking spaces. And I'd be really willing to bet that there's going to be more than 12 units with two cars for that parking lot. And that parking study, you never did the weekends. And you talked about Friday night. Friday night is very tough. The evenings are tough. And everybody in those 190, or a good portion of the people in those 194 units will be home, many with two cars. Where will everybody park? I just don't see it. And never mind any parking space, think about it. Use your common sense. Does it make sense to you? To me, it doesn't make sense. To me, it says you're going to be spending $16 million to lose parking spaces. And I also found it interesting that he talked about that there would be less demand, less parking demand when you cut out the retail or the commercial. But don't we want parking demand? Don't we want people downtown? So why is less parking demand a good thing? I thought we wanted that. I thought that was the whole point of this, to get more people downtown. And if you're just catering to those 194 units, how many people are going to be living in those 194 units? Let's give them two people per unit. That's maybe 400 people. And how many businesses can be supported with 400 people? Not many. They're not going to be using the businesses every day. So that's not going to be much of a return. You got 26,000 people in town and hundreds of people in the surrounding area to the downtown. If they can't make it work, then throwing 400 more people in a tight little spot is not going to make it work. You need things to draw people downtown. The biggest thing I've heard from people is, so we have more people with no place to go, no businesses to go to. If you look at it, 400 people added into the downtown is not going to do a lot of good for the people, for the businesses down there. So those are just some of my concerns. I also took offense at Mr. Petzel's language when he called it a damn building. It should be something that he's proud of and not calling it a damn building. To me, it just debased the building and what he's trying to do. And that's part of the language thing that I want you to look at and try to look at objectively by watching the video or just listening to video and see what he's doing. And I want you to look at the facts, step back, look at the facts, and see if this is going to make sense. To me, it doesn't make sense. And I think you're I like the idea of having another option, putting it out there, see what other developers have. This is not the only developer in town. I know he's done some good things that the mayor is very proud of, but there are other developers that may have other proposals to do things that wouldn't be something that people have called an eyesore that's huge and looming in the building. And lastly, I've come from Chicago. I grew up in Chicago on the south side. My dad's still down there, so I get there frequently. And with the buildings up to the sidewalks, you're looking at Chicago. And I moved out of Chicago. I didn't want to live in Chicago. Batavia had a charm of all its own. And if you take away that charm, you might as well just go live in Chicago or Naperville or Geneva or someplace else, but it's not Batavia. So I ask you to please try to keep the old town charm, and especially the working class charm of Batavia the way it was. It has its own draw for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Anybody else?
Hi, Michael Vincent. I would like to thank all of you for your critical thinking on this project, and I encourage more of it. You asked what we thought of the plan. Looking at the line drawings here, I'd say I agree that the State Street elevation does look better than the previous version, but I think the Wilson looks far worse. I think the lack of retail is a problem. This talk of the hillside being an issue, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. There's plenty of retail built on far steeper hills. I don't think it should be an insurmountable issue. I'd like to thank the local reporters for their dedication in covering these meetings, and it brings up a question I have for the developer. One of the stories a few weeks ago talking about this, maybe it was an earlier iteration of changes to the building, but there was talk of, I think, using precast concrete for the parking structure or for the whole building, and one of the outcomes of that would have been that the building would get even taller, and as I think it's too tall to begin with, I'm curious if that's still in the works or if we're back to the already approved height. Thank you.
Thanks. Dave, do you have a comment on that precast?
Regarding the precast, we're still in discussions with the local precasters to see if if the building can be done in precast. One of the issues with the precast is the depth of the floor slab, or they call it a double T, and that double T would force the floor thickness to be thicker and could potentially force the building to be taller. But once we get further into plans and come before the Plan Commission in a historic preservation, we would have that ironed out to know exactly what height we will be and what, if that height changes, what the current approval is. So I can't tell you today whether we are taller than what's currently approved or will be taller or won't be taller than what's currently approved.
Okay, thank you.
Since I'm up here, I'd like to respond to two other comments that were made. First one was about generating children. I want to make sure it's clear that state law requires that if for every child that we generate, we have to pay to educate those children as long as they're in the Batavia public school system. So whether it's 2 or 200 or 400, whatever the number is, we have to pay to educate those children. And then also there was an indication or suggestion that we are doing affordable housing. I don't know where that had come from. I believe that I stood before you in the past, and if you didn't hear me then, I'll say it again. We are not, and we will not, and we have not done affordable housing. And we will not, have not, and are not going to do affordable housing in Batavia. We are not interested in an affordable housing project. Thanks.
Thanks. Gene?
I just came here to observe, actually, because I've never seen something like this happen here at City Hall, where a developer gets this far into a project and the city is a vested partner in it, and then at the last minute pretty much pulls the rug out from under you unless you play the game his way, okay? Somebody dropped the ball early on, okay? He should have known. That was mentioned by a few of the aldermen here, and I appreciate that. And make note, I never dropped the F-bomb in any meetings either. I've dropped a few, but not that one. So I'm glad that you guys are, going to take the time. I'm not going to discuss the plans. Take the time to consider what he's asking you to do. I don't think it's the right way to go. I think there's others out there that are more than willing to develop this parcel. I remember a number of years ago, I think there was a project called Windhaven. I know the mayor was here, I was here. I don't remember, Dave, if you were here yet or not. I mean,
I think so.
We spent a lot of time discussing that project, and that would have happened right here. And that went away, and look at what we have now. We have the Riverwalk as a result and everything else. But I just hope you all really reconsider, revising the partnership that you have. And if it moves on, it has to go back to Plan Commission or whatever, well, hopefully you'll get it drawn up in the right number so that it can go forward. That's all I'm going to say tonight.
Thanks. Anyone else? Sylvia, keep it short, please. It's getting late.
I just need to correct Mr. Petzl's corrections. They only are responsible for, I believe it's up to 40% of the residential increment is what they are responsible for. So the school district had calculated to something like 16 students. I might be wrong on that. But they would only cover 16 students or whatever number that they had calculated. Anything beyond that would be uncovered in the school district. So that was not correct. There was another, what was the other correction that was, you were incorrect on that too?
This was 21 students. It's 40% maximum of the total.
No, of the residential portion, I think. Yes.
Increment, right? But it was 21 students. Now that may increase if the increment increases based on the rental.
And then what was your other correction was wrong? Affordable housing. Affordable housing, the reason it was defined as affordable housing was they were calculating, I think, was 30% of the average income for the area. Is that correct? Or what is it? What's considered? No.
Project.
What is the affordable housing is?
You're thinking of the one with the glass brick.
No, Ms. Stark was the one that had mentioned, called it affordable housing. It's based on a certain percentage of the average income for the area. And then they look at to see, I think it is 30% of the average income
No
for
way
the
this
area.
project would get down to that level.
Well, we're really not discussing whether this is affordable housing or not.
But it had been billed as affordable, which I chuckled at. I remember it because I chuckled before, thinking that $1,400 was not very affordable in my estimation. But it had been billed as affordable housing.
Anyone else? Laura? And then we got one more? Okay.
I am making a comment on behalf of Mary Claire Harris, who is a property owner on North River Street, and she asked me to make this statement tonight because she's unable to be here. And she just wanted to go on record to say that she is not in favor of changing the project because she liked the aspect of having the retail on Wilson Street. She thought that that would help the River Street businesses too, and it wouldn't be as helpful having more residential. And that too much residential doesn't make downtown a destination. So I just wanted to share that on her behalf since she couldn't be here.
Okay, thanks. One more.
Kevin Callahan, 801 Manchester, Xavier. After hearing everything tonight, and I was kind of curious, I don't think we have to browbeat Shodian's representative anymore tonight. They probably had it stuck up where we know what's going to be right now as it is. They made a mistake. We all do. I understand where the board's going through. I understand what you want to see. Comment made earlier was Loyola and their horizontal commercial stuff. Well, Loyola puts a building over there, you could have that. Big deal. We're not in Chicago. We're in Batavia, Illinois. We're proud of it. $2 million, another $2 million added, I think, is what really just jumps out at everybody. Anybody you talk to in this town says, another $2 million? Come on. We went through how many months or a year or more of trying to get this approved as it is. The board approved it as it was. The planning commission didn't even like it to begin with, but it was overridden, it was approved, and that's what everybody agreed to. We had a vision. We wanted retail out there. We want to bring people in. We don't want to have this place look like a big apartment complex throughout the whole city of Batavia. We want to be proud of it. Yeah, there's a site across the street they just cleared for the gas station that could bring commercial. How big is that going to be, and what's that going to do to traffic patterns right on that corner anyway of 25 and Wilson? It's going to make it even worse, and we're trying to get through this. The things that scare me, and it was brought up, was that, okay, $2 million more, okay, you have to justify that. You have to convince us that this is right, that this increase is going to work. They made a mistake, understandable. Everybody makes mistakes. They missed something. Why wasn't this done before? Where was the third party looking at this stuff to give you firm numbers before this original project was approved? But that being said, what scares me more is that, and it was brought up tonight, was that when is the shoe going to drop again? Are we going to get 8 months into this, a year in this, and all of a sudden they come back? We need more money for this. And I only say that because there was discussion before, just a little while ago, about looking at the parking lot inside the building structure, you know, the area itself, that if we go horizontal parking, parallel parking, whatever, it's going to be tight. All of a sudden, we've got a problem with parking. Well, and the comment was made, we got to look at that again. These little things don't really put a lot of confidence in me as a taxpayer on what's going to end up happening with this building. I think the idea you have is right. Go back to Planning Commission. Get this thing down. Get it nailed down and get it right. 100 years from now, when everybody has a look at it, we're not going to be around to see it. Our kids and grandkids are going to have to deal with this. But let's get it right now, and don't worry about this isn't a monument to this board or this or anybody else here. This is going to be what we're proud of to look at, what the city of Batavia wanted to begin with. It doesn't make any difference what we feel. It's what other people are going to say about it. We're not Geneva. We're not St. Charles. And we're not Oak Plainfield or anybody else. So we got to quit trying to look like them. They have the resources. They have the roadway system set up where they can do this stuff. We don't have it. We're kind of landlocked. So we better start looking at that first and see what that's going to do to us, and then get the building. I'm not saying throw Shodian's project under the bus and get rid of it, but like was brought up, there are other contractors or developers that may want to be coming in, may not, but we have something there. We have a parking system that could be going in. But let's not let that direct what this thing is going to look like, because we can get some parking spaces down there. I mean, there's a lot of ways of working this out. We just put a temporary parking space in there, and there's nothing to say that this board couldn't turn around later on and say, we're going to make that permanent now, even though we plan on selling that off. So there's a lot of things down the road. We're getting people in here, as brought up, and we're getting interest. The other thing is that with the rental of retail, it was brought up, it was about $20 a square foot or whatever it was for retail rental. And they're paying 14. What's that going to do when the other rental areas down there that people have in there, and their owners say, well, they're getting $20 down there for retail. I'm going to raise your rent up here to make it $16, $18, $20 also. Are they going to stay? Are they going to move? There's a lot of things you have to look at. Because when you do one, like you said, it's a teeter-totter. You have some good things, you have some improvements, you have some modernization. The other downside is that it's going to affect other people. And when it does, we may be hurting ourselves even more in the long run. Thank you.
Thanks. Future, more comments? More questions? On the committee? Artie?
Just real quick, I think we spent, to kind of use what the mayor said, we spent 2.5 years ruminating and cogitating on this of what we wanted, and we got it nailed down to what we wanted. And it was all based on all those things that Nick, Scott, and Mike are saying about how this was sold, the overall vision of how this was sold. And it's slightly bothering to me that it feels like the main points of like what Nick's saying, well, that's gone. And now we're shown the next shiny thing. And are we putting something there because we want something, or are we putting something that we want there? It's two major different things. I understand the part about what we want, what we're trying to accomplish with what Drew's saying about Elmhurst and all those things. But we're not trying to be Elmhurst. We are trying to be Batavia in the way of maybe incorporating and stealing some of those ideas to try to make it work for here. This, to me, automatically just, the other one I warmed up to, but this one just doesn't, nothing to me just speaks to it. It's an apartment building. And that doesn't speak to what Scott said about the dreamer part of it. There's no dream element to this. That's the part that's still really missing for me on it, because you've got to start with the dream to be able to envision that, and I don't see it anymore.
Okay, so the way I see this, I'm kind of making some notes here, is we got a few choices to move forward here tonight. Correct me if you want to add something else to this, but one is we can tell staff and tell a developer that we don't want to see any changes from what we've already approved. We're done. That's it. The other one is we could authorize staff, as it says here in the next steps, authorize staff to proceed with the evaluation of the developer's submittals and prepare a revised RDA. Another one would be, since we just really all saw this tonight, take some time, digest it, think about it, and have discussion again next Tuesday night about it. And at that point, hopefully we can give some further direction to staff on what to do. Does anybody have any other ideas on that as far as a choice?
I like that concept, because this was, and it's something that really bothers me, that this is what we received today. This has been a lot of work went into this, and there's been a lot of negotiating between staff, and this is the first time we're being presented with this. So I would like to go through this again myself further and have more discussion and have more time to bring up questions and whatnot. I think it would be the best interest in for the residents that we take our time and move cautiously.
I'm not saying I'm not agreeing with you, but when I say.
Why not?
When you say take our time, yet at the same time, I don't want to drag this out forever. So, think about it for a week. Let's put it on next Tuesday's agenda. Laura, is there anything really pressing that we won't be able to have time for this conversation next Tuesday?
It will just be another long meeting. We just have a lot on our agendas lately.
Why not? Is what it is, I guess, right? Got to run business.
Pays the big bucks.
So,
It was a lot of information for us to digest, but I am curious if we could at least take a temperature. Is there anyone in the group that absolutely is unwilling to budge after what we just heard tonight? I'm very curious to hear if anyone is unmoved.
unwilling to budge whatsoever.
Yeah, saying, go ahead and send this back to staff and say, we are not interested in changing the plans. I was that guy when I walked in today. I'm not that guy anymore. I'm interested in saying, maybe they can work something out with staff. I'm curious if anybody else here was not moved.
I'm right there with you. Does anybody have that consensus that they wouldn't be willing to budge whatsoever?
If we had to take a vote tonight, I would say.
Well,
no.
we're not. I
That's
mean,
why-
Dan's just asking the question, is trying to
Right.
take a temperature.
Where I'm at now, I wouldn't budge. But that's why I'm saying I want to really digest this and give it the fair amount of time that it deserves and really look things through.
Fair enough.
I'm 100% with Nick.
Yes.
Likewise, I'm not finding I want to budge on the retail, but yeah.
I have a question. Dave, I had asked the question about have you run the numbers on retail on Wilson, and you're going to tell us it just absolutely positively will not work?
It doesn't. Doesn't pay for it. The cost of it to build it with the parking underneath. Now, if you say, okay, can you put the retail in, get rid of the parking under it? That analysis hasn't been run. But again, it's the teeter-totter. So it will not work, at least that we have seen, to build parking under the retail along Wilson.
And how many spots was that?
That retail is about 60 feet deep. So because we've done a couple things, we've rotated the building, but it's 60, so it's almost an entire bay of full parking, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm going to say 24-ish spaces.
Dave, could you maybe, in your just kicking it around for the next week, knowing how the retail is kind of important to some of us, but still the teeter-totter part, Susan brought up some ideas about closing the front part. Is that an option? Does that make sense with it? Maybe think of this as not an opportunity to go completely back to the drawing board, but are there things that, maybe the things that are still very important to us, is it even remotely possible, throwing your wildest thinking caps on? Jazzing up the State Street side, that alleviates the kind of the boredom that we have there now. Is there a way to incorporate that with maintaining the nice side of still Wilson Street, thereby making all four sides now relatively attractive without having the dead spots? And I don't know those things. We're just hearing it for the first time, but rethinking it of what can we do?
I will continue to give it thought of what can be done.
Do you have anything else, Dave?
Just heads up, I have you don't have to reschedule the meeting, but I won't be in attendance at your next Tuesday meeting. I'll be out of town, so I apologize. So please don't take that as a not interested or some other feeling.
Okay. All right, so is that good? We're going to continue this discussion to next Tuesday evening? Okay, thank you. Next item is others. I don't think we have any others. Laura? Nope. No, we do not. Motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
By Forrest. You guys go so fast, it takes me too long. Motion by O'Brien, second by Salvati. All in favor?
Aye.
Trying to get